Say it again. Good morning. The headline read, "Two men charged with brandishing a swastika on the arm of a Native American Indian man." And just yesterday, the headline read, "Two men sentenced for racially motivated assault in New Mexico. First defendants charged under the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act." Mayor Dean, members of the Metro Human Relations Commission, the U.S. Attorney for the Middle District of Tennessee, Mr. Jerry Martin, other distinguished federal officials, representatives, guests, and the Tennessee State University family, welcome. On behalf of President Shields, and as you can see, I am not Dr. President Shields, I welcome you to Tennessee State University, the land of golden sunshine. It is quite appropriate that we are gathered here today at the Avon Williams campus to discuss the expansion of the federal hate crime law that was originally passed in 1969. Because Avon Williams was devoted his career as an attorney and a legislator to protecting civil rights and eliminating injustices. Today, with over reported 1,000 hate crime groups, that is 1,000 identifiable groups galvanized over a common purpose of promoting hatred toward a group of people because of their skin color, sexual identity, national origin, religion, and other characteristics. There is sadly a need more than ever than 1969 for protection against hatred. Campuses like ours are not immune to hate crimes. In fact, 12% of hate crimes occur on college and school grounds. So thank you, Carolyn Blackwell, the Human Relations Commission, and the U.S. Department of Justice for organizing this most timely event. Let us leave here today aware of the resources available to combat hatred and committed to work steadfast against it, remembering the old adage, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Thank you, and best wishes for a successful forum.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me? First of all, I would like to thank TSU, the family here at TSU, for their partnership to have us here, and the Commission looks forward to hopefully continue in different quarterly forums that lead the way for different issues, and we appreciate you being here today. Good morning. My name is Scott Ridgway, and I have the privilege of serving as the chair of the Metro Human Relations Commission, an agency of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County. Our commission is charged with protecting and promoting the dignity of all people through a variety of services that help to ensure the safety, the health, security, peace, and general welfare of all people in Davidson County. We work to help people and organizations to understand and defend their civil and human rights. We also provide education and advocacy regarding diversity, cultural awareness, inclusivity within Nashville government and the private sector. It is my hope that today's event and its featured segment will help you understand, investigate, respond to, and ultimately prevent hate crimes in Nashville and Middle Tennessee. We are honored to have one of the best mayors in Tennessee, a strong supporter of our mission, and advocate for hate crimes for many years, our own Honorable Carl Dean, Mayor of the city, as one of our guest speakers today at this event, as well as other speakers from several local, state, and federal agencies. Their presence here makes a powerful statement about the importance of hate crime prevention. I believe it is timely of today's forum could not be more appropriate. In my professional job as the Executive Director of the Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network, I have been in Smith County leading a team of professionals after the death of another student that has died by suicide. Some of you are probably aware that this is the second death of youth suicide in Middle Tennessee, and that the role that bullying and other stressors that play a role due to his sexual orientation of these two instances. These tragedies should remind us how attitudes lead to action, for good or for ill, and how violence and hateful attitudes toward people often lead to violence and hateful actions against people. Teaching people about the values of understanding, compassionate, and acceptance contributes to positive actions that improves the quality of life for everyone, not just people of certain race, religion, orientation, and background. I would like to thank the U.S. Department of Justice for their partnership with this forum today. We would like to recognize our sponsors, and your sponsors are listed in the packet. At this time, I would like to introduce someone who is working every day to make sure the reality of people of Nashville, her leadership, her vision, and what Nashville can be, with helping make the Metro Human Relations Commission a vital force within our community. She and her staff have worked very hard to lay out the groundwork of today's event. I thank them for that, and they have done as our commission moves forward. It is my pleasure to introduce the Executive Director of the Metro Human Relations Commission, Caroline Blackwell.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I thank all of you again for being here today. I want to just take a few moments not to call attention to hate today, but to recognize that this forum was organized to, in fact, help us focus on what we can do to prevent these kinds of activities in our community. If you came today thinking that this was going to be a time where the focus was going to be solely on the negative, then I hope that at the end of the day you don't feel that way. But that in point of fact, what you hear today are stories, is information, is vital statistics, everything that we need to empower ourselves and to equip ourselves to take better care of one another, those people that we love in our community. So thank you very much for coming today. And I have the pleasure at this particular juncture to move the program along a little bit. We got a little bit of a late start, so I'm going to shorten my remarks and introduce to you someone who we all, I hope, hold dear. I know I certainly do. Mayor Carl Dean. He has come today to open this forum, and we couldn't be more pleased for that. Mayor Dean is the 6th mayor of the metropolitan government of Davidson County, was first elected in 2007, and fortunately re-elected it last August. Mayor Dean has led Nashville through two really big challenges. One, a deep national recession, which we're still recovering from, and a 1,000-year flood that we know have affected and continues to affect members of our community. Mayor Dean works diligently to sustain and improve Nashville's high quality of life. He was first elected to the Public Defender's Office in 1990, was re-elected in 1994 and 1998. Mayor Dean served as the Metro Law Director from 1999 until 2007, when he resigned to run for mayor. Mayor Dean, we couldn't be more grateful for your presence here today, and thank you for opening the forum. Mayor Dean. You want to go here? Okay, absolutely.
I don't want to hide behind that big one there. I could get this up. Well, thank you all for having me here. It's an honor to be here, and I am very pleased that Caroline and the Human Relations Commission has put this event together. I think this is something that's very important for our city and an important topic for us all to discuss and to think about. I'd also like to take a moment to welcome Dennis Shepard to Nashville. We're honored to have you here, and I'm looking forward to introducing you at the conclusion of my remarks. And let me say a word also of recognition and thanks to Jerry Martin, our excellent U.S. Attorney, for participating in this event. We have many local and statewide and federal law enforcement people here with us today, but I want to take a moment to recognize Chief Anderson. Chief, thank you for being here. As a former public defender for Nashville, I have seen a lot of different crimes and a lot of different motivations for crimes. There are crimes of opportunity, when someone takes advantage of the vulnerability of another person or their belongings. when there's just, it's easy to commit the crime, so someone commits the crime. There are crimes of passion, where crimes occur in the heat of the moment and escalate far beyond their original intent. There are crimes that occur because of a cycle of learned violence, which we see most frequently in the area of domestic violence or perhaps child abuse. There are crimes, many, many crimes, that occur out of addiction, where someone is supporting a drug habit or is an alcoholic and for whatever reason commits a crime either while under the influence or while they need to raise money to keep their addiction going. Of course, there are other crimes that happen out of just plain meanness and out of ignorance or even out of evil. And while the motivations behind these types of crimes are different, they can all lead to intentional and unintentional fatal consequences. And they can all quickly become a foundation for a hate crime. And this can happen because hate crimes can spring out of opportunity, out of passion, out of learned violence, out of alcohol and drug use, and of course, just plain meanness or evil, but also out of ignorance. A serial rapist or a serial murderer that is at large, just like that, hate crime can cause a ripple through a community. When a serial rapist or a murderer is on the loose in the community, there is an alarm that goes throughout the entire population. When the perpetrator is caught, there is really almost an audible collective sigh of relief, and people kind of calm down and think that that crisis is over. That is not the case in hate crimes. When someone commits a violent hate crime, its occurrence, looking at it from the outside of a community, becomes almost a symbol of the community in which that crime occurred. It's as if the town or the city where the hate crime occurs becomes the perpetrator and the victim at the same time. People say the hate crime occurred there, so something has to be wrong there. People on the outside can be quick to assume falsely that a community has turned a blind eye to this sort of attitude. This type of guilt by association also happens in other areas, not just hate crimes. If your city has a high crime rate, that image of your city becomes a problem for you in terms of economic development and other issues. And as mayor, that's why I have always kept public safety as a very, very high priority. Because I've always believed that there is a connection between public safety and education. If you have a safe city, kids are going to go to school, they're going to feel comfortable in school, and they're going to learn in school. If you have a safe city, people are going to want to live in your city, they're going to want to invest in your city, and they're going to want to see your city grow and prosper. So it's important always to focus on public safety. Here in Nashville, we have been fortunate to see crime go down really over most of the last 10 years. We were fortunate to be able to announce on January 1st that Nashville as a city, in terms of the homicide rate for last year, we hit the lowest homicide rate we've had in 45 years. 51 Nashvillians, 51, died by homicide in 2011. That is an obscene number. No one should take comfort from the fact that we've hit a 45-year low. There are countries in the world that have lower homicide rates than that. But the facts are facts. The last time we hit that number was 1966. So I think that the fact that we have a hardworking police department and a well-staffed police department has helped us reduce crime. We are also fortunate to have a low hate crime rate. Of the 6,624 hate crime incidents reported nationally in 2010, only 11 occurred in Nashville. And while, again, 11 incidents is still too many, many of these were property offenses. An example of a hate crime that occurred in Nashville that I'm personally aware of was the hate-motivated vandalism of a mosque on 4th Avenue that occurred in February of 2010. This mosque was vandalized with religious-motivated hate messages. Hate messages were spray-painted on the mosque's exterior, and a disparaging note was left on the youth center door. The Tennessee law, the Tennessee Code criminalizes the act of damaging real or personal property of others with the intent to intimidate them from exercising their constitutional rights. And one of your constitutional rights, of course, would be the freedom to practice religion. Naturally, mosque members, their neighbors, and all of Nashville were distressed and heartbroken to see something like this happen to a place of worship. I went to the mosque with the chief of police, met with its leaders, and I can tell you their reaction was they were happy to see us and glad we were there, but they said, "Mayor, we get it, this is not Nashville. This is not what this city is about. We know that this city is a good, friendly city." But it was something that we took seriously and we need to take seriously. In Tennessee, more violent hate crimes that occur in Tennessee, the Tennessee courts are allowed to look at the motivation behind a crime in determining the sentence that an individual gets. When a judge does sentencing, they get to look at certain enhancement factors, which means you get a higher sentence than the medium or the lower part of the range of the sentence. And you also can look at mitigation factors. One of the enhancement factors in Tennessee is that if a crime was committed out of the defendant's belief or perception regarding the race, religion, color, disability, sexual orientation, national origin, ancestry, or gender of that person, that can be considered by the judge when imposing sentence. That's where we stand with hate crime and where we stand with crime in Nashville right now. But what I want to talk about is really what I think this city has been doing and what we need to continue to do. One of the things that gives me the most pride as mayor, mayors get hung up on rankings. I mean, really, we'll talk about rankings for being the best value city, being a boom town. I'm pretty proud of the one that Rolling Stone says we're the best music scene in the United States. But there are all sorts of rankings. There are rankings that I don't like, that we rank as a state at the very bottom when it comes to obesity and health in that regard. But one of the things that I think is true about Nashville, and you always see this from Travel and Leisure magazine, that we're always ranked in the top 3 cities and generally number 1. Not that I'm competitive about this, but we are generally ranked as the friendliest city in the United States. And you know, as many of you probably know, I am not a Nashville native. I came here about 30 years ago, and people can start calling me a native here in another 5 years, I guess. But one of the things that strikes anybody who comes to the city is just how friendly this place is. And I think it comes from a lot of different reasons. Part of it is, you know, is sort of the Southern culture. Part of it is the fact that we don't talk about this a lot, but I think Nashville is a community with a lot of faith. There are synagogues and mosques and Christian churches of all different types. And religion plays probably a greater role in the life of this community than in most cities. And I think, you know, if you're going to church or you're going to the mosque or you're going to the synagogue, if you're practicing what you're being told, you're generally going to be a little more friendly. I think that's part of it. And part of it is that we just value this, that we've come to accept that being friendly is part of being a Nashvilleian, and we work to maintain that. And there have been many moments that I have been proud of the city since I've been mayor. And the 2 moments that stand out the most sort of relate to this whole idea of being a friendly, welcoming city that embraces diversity. The first one that I would mention is the flood that occurred here in the spring of 2010. I'm not going to go over the history of the flood, but as you recall, on May 1st and May 2nd, in basically a 40-hour time period, we got about 15 inches of rain. More rain fell in Nashville in those 2 days and in the history of record keeping for rain in Nashville. And we had a 1,000-year flood. We had 11 citizens die. We had $2 billion of damage to private property, hundreds of millions of dollars of damages to public property. But what we all remember about the flood is not the pain of the losses we suffered. We haven't forgotten the people who lost their lives. But what we remember about the flood was that we saw all throughout the city neighbors helping neighbors, neighbors helping complete strangers, churches helping their parishioners, churches helping people who never set foot in their church before, businesses helping their employees, businesses helping people they never no affiliation with. And Hands On Nashville, within about 2 weeks, getting 20,000 volunteers out in the streets of Nashville. And the flood was non-discriminatory. The flood hit in east, west, south, north Nashville, all different economic groups, all different racial groups, all different religious groups. Everybody was affected by it. And the city's response to the flood was to work together, to volunteer, and to look out for each other. That's the message Nashville needs to send. The other moment that sticks in my mind, and I will never forget, and I'm so proud of the city for, was the defeat of English only. Now, this issue, these debates around the area of immigration have been going on in this country for a long time, and really intensified really in the last 6 or 7 years. And there have been efforts to sort of send an anti-immigrant message. And those efforts really came to fruition in Nashville when a referendum was created, basically by getting enough signatures to put on the ballot a proposition saying that the city of Nashville can only do business in English, that we could not communicate with people in any other language. Most of us saw that message and we were horrified. Number one, just as human beings, it's not a very friendly thing to do. Number two, in terms of economic development, if we are, a hospitality city where the second largest private employer is the hospitality industry, and we're telling people, don't come to our city because we won't speak your language, we're not open. It's a terrible message. But what was so reassuring, and I was nervous about it, when it first got on the ballot, I thought because remember the passions on this issue were about their peak then, that this could pass, and that would be a terrible thing. But community leaders from all over Nashville came together and said, this is not us. This is not what this city's about. We are a city about being open, we are a city about being diverse, and we're going to keep going in that direction. And so you had church leaders, you had the ACLU, you had labor unions, you had business interests, you had this run-of-the-mill folks who aren't involved in any organization or any sort of political agenda all come together and work to defeat that referendum, and we defeated it. And fittingly enough, the organization that ran that campaign was called Nashville for All of Us. Nashville for All of Us. And that's what we should always be about. This city is for all of us. Another area where I think we can look at positive trends in Nashville is in the area of non-discrimination based on sexual preference. I just talked about the efforts that I was proud of many of our civic leaders and adults in terms of leading that campaign against English only. But another thing to be proud of is that the Metro School Board voted back, I believe, in 2008 to approve changes in its code of student conduct and its employee non-discrimination policy to say that students and school employees were protected from gender identity or sexual orientation discrimination. And my understanding of how that worked its way up is it started with the students who went to the board, and the board approved it with very little controversy, and Nashville was one of the first cities in the Southeast to make that statement. The Metro Council then, with my support, filed an ordinance which would say that Metro employees could not be discriminated against in terms of sexual identity. Right? It passed the Metro Council actually with a very comfortable margin of victory. I proudly signed it into law, and that became the law for our city. This past year in 2011, the Metro Council passed a non-discrimination ordinance that stated that any contractor doing business with the city would pledge not to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. We already require people who contract with us not to discriminate on against a variety of other groups. That passed the council. Again, I proudly signed it into law. And then the Tennessee legislature passed a bill that basically said that local governments no longer had the right to pass such legislation. I was disappointed by the state action, but I could not have been more proud of what the council had done and what the city had done. I think the state should let cities run themselves. And if this city, this city does, wants to make a strong statement that we do not discriminate and we're not going to discriminate and we want to be inclusive, we should be able to make that statement. One of the other areas I want to just mention about sort of the future where Nashville has an opportunity to make a very positive statement is in the area of school bullying. One of the concerns that has been cited in the lawsuit against this, basically against the state law that didn't allow us to pass our own ordinance, is that new ordinance may affect our ability to have certain bullying protections in our schools. I think we all can agree that our children in school need to be protected from bullying and discrimination. You know, one of the things, and I see Gracie Porter's here from the school board, that one of the things we've worked the hardest on the last 4 years and put a lot of money into too, has been school attendance. You know, one of the first things I did in terms of education was to work on creating a school attendance center in East Nashville. We took the old East Precinct and made it an attendance center. It's a place where kids who are picked up for loitering or truancy during the school day are brought instead of going down to the juvenile court. And the schools picked up the banner and have done a wonderful job of increasing their attention that's been focused they're giving to school attendance in terms of taking attendance every period. And so we have literally seen over the course of the last 4 years about a 40% reduction in truancy, which is a good thing. So the last thing I want to see, the last message we need to be sending is that school is anywhere other than a safe place for all kids to be. That the schools need to be a place where kids who are confronted and adolescents with all sorts of issues, and that they need to have a place where they're safe, where they're secure, and people listen to them. Gail Kerr wrote I think, she hasn't asked my opinion, but I think, she wrote a great column yesterday. It's on the local business section. It says, "Don't say gay bill would produce hostility in schools." There's a bill that basically is now in front of the legislature that says teachers can't use the word gay or talk about homosexuality to high school students. Right. This is what Gail says. 2 Middle Tennessee gay teens have killed themselves in recent weeks, and friends and family members say both were the objects of persistent bullying in school because of their sexuality, which is the best reason Tennessee lawmakers need to examine their hearts and put a screeching halt to the Don't Say Gay bill, which would contribute to a toxic atmosphere in schools. By telling teachers that they cannot discuss homosexuality, the legislature would be endorsing a free-for-all bullying of gays. The bill breeds hostility in the highest halls of power in Tennessee, and there's no excuse for it. I think we should communicate with our legislatures and tell them that we oppose such a bill. Let me talk one more minute about pride in the city and something else that happened. This is directly related, I think, to how people are treated in our city. This past June, all Nashvillians came together, or a lot of Nashvillians came together to help out in terms of tolerance and understanding of diversity, but also to take a stand. On that particular date, the funeral was being held for a 27-year-old sergeant named Sergeant Baldoff, who was killed fighting for his country in Afghanistan. It was around this time that the Westboro Baptist Church out of Topeka, Kansas, was protesting funerals of homosexual soldiers. And they used funerals of all different types of soldiers just as a means to promote their anti-homosexual agenda. Hundreds of Nashvillians showed up that morning in a counter-protest. All down the road leading up to the church was a sea of American flags and banners and supporters for the sergeant's family. Free speech works both ways. And sometimes it is simply a matter of how many show up and who gets there first. As a result of what happened here in Nashville, that small group of Westboro protesters were unable to get anywhere near the funeral and left after 10 minutes. Nashvillians know how to, in Lincoln's words, put their feet in the right direction and then stand firm. This is a great city. This is a city with so much going for it. But as we grow, and we're going to grow, and as we become a more interesting city and more cultural amenities and other things, we can't lose track of the value of diversity, the value of just being friendly and treating each other as human beings. That is what really makes Nashville special. And that is the real counter to hate crimes, is the way a city views itself and the way we project ourselves to the world. Dennis Shepard is the father of Matthew Shepard, a young man that cared a lot about others, about acceptance, and about equality. He was a well-rounded kid, the type of kid that any parent would be proud of. In October of 1998, Matthew was brutally murdered by two men filled with the type of bigotry and hate that Matthew worked hard against. The loss that your family has gone through broke the hearts of parents around the world. The way you and your wife Judy have expressed your grief in a relentless desire to make lasting change has inspired millions. Not only did they form the Matthew Shepard Foundation with the mission to encourage respect for human dignity and the differences by raising awareness, opening dialogues, and promoting positive change, they have traveled around the country speaking to victim advocacy organizations and law enforcement audience about the equal treatment of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender crime victims. Their over a decade's worth of work was instrumental to the enactment of the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. No doubt, in the words of President Barack Obama, the bells of freedom ring louder because of the work that Mr. Shepard and his wife have done on behalf of their son. It is my pleasure, it is my honor to welcome to Nashville and now to introduce the father of Matthew Shepard, Mr. Dennis Shepard.
Thank you, everyone. Mayor Dean, I appreciate the kind words. I didn't realize how welcoming I was here until I walked down the halls of the hotel this morning and saw the headlines. I just hope that you appreciate what people are doing to protect the kids. And if this is what it takes, I'm all for it. What I want to talk about today, first of all, let me explain something. It's a very rare deal. When I first started speaking to the FBI, I cut a deal. And usually when you cut a deal with the Department of Justice or the FBI, it means you've been a really bad boy or bad girl. Fortunately, that wasn't the case for me. It was a two-part deal. The first part was that the next time I go to Washington, D.C., I get the opportunity to go through the Yellow Brick Road, which is the FBI obstacle course. I'm a little nervous about doing that, but I look forward to it. The second part of the deal is the best part. Why all of you are out here wearing nice clothes, ties. The deal that I made was I get to wear boots and Wranglers. During my talk, I'll be quoting from my statement different times. Outside, you will find a copy of my court statement and a wristband. Please take one of each. The reason I want you to take my statement, I want you to take it home. I want you to read it to yourself, either quietly or aloud, perhaps in front of a mirror. I want you to read it from the standpoint that you were standing in front of that courtroom instead of me. I want you to use somebody else's name, someone that you're close to, son, a daughter, brother, close friend, even a coworker. And you have to talk about that person for the last time. You have to tell the world who that person was for the last time. In addition, there's a wristband. This wristband is the foundation wristband. It has a web page on it, which is the organizational web page. On the other side is our motto, Erase Hate. Use this, go to the web page, and see what we have for you for resources. We have two different web pages. The foundation web page and another web page called Matthew's Place for kids. It's a resource for kids, their friends, their family, for those kids who have questions. They're not sure who they are, why they are, where they are. Wear the wristband, put it on your desk, pin it to your wall as a reminder that there are people out there who need your help. They need your support. They need your backing to make it through life. Oh, wonderful. Hold on one moment. I just have to figure out how to use this. Okay, great, thank you. When it comes to electronics, Judy does it all. The Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2009 was signed into law by President Obama on October 28th of 2009. Now, I won't talk about the specifics. It's sitting a little bit too high. There are others who are more qualified to do so, but I will tell you this. This is a news article for the first prosecution under the law in Little Rock, Arkansas. They attacked 5 gentlemen of Hispanic origin, threatening them with tire iron. They eventually bumped their vehicle enough across the highway that it ran into a tree, injuring all 5. the law is being enforced. Now, on the screen you see a photo of Judy and me. In June of 2010, she was honored as the Grand Marshal of the New York City Gay Pride Parade. And no, that is not my purple hat that she's wearing. If you've never been to the parade in New York, if you started drinking beer when the Grand Marshals took off and you're the last group to march in the parade, you drank beer for 6 to 8 hours. But just to prove to you that I do let Judy dress me up occasionally, here we are at the White House when President Obama signed the act into law. It was a culmination of 10 years of people telling Judy she couldn't get it done. What I'm going to talk to you about are two specific hate crimes, one briefly and one in great detail. Hate crimes that led to this law. And I need to tell you right now, part of what you're going to hear may be disturbing, personally, professionally, or both. I'll just wave at you. Most, if not all of you, are familiar with the tragic story of James Byrd Jr. On June 7th, 1998, Mr. Byrd was walking down a paved road outside of Jasper, Texas, when three men in a pickup truck stopped, beat him, tied him to the back of a truck with chain, and dragged him to his death on that paved road. One of those three men, I know you can't read it very well, it's a newspaper article, has now been executed for this crime. A second is on death row appealing his sentence. And a third is in prison for life. This was a vicious and terrible hate crime. One that Matt, Judy, and I discussed over dinner one night, never knowing that one day our lives would be linked by hate crime. Who is Matthew Shepard? Most, if not all of you, know something about Matt. Many of you can even tell me where you were and what you were doing when you heard about his beating. However, most of the kids 20 years and younger have no idea who Matt is and what was so significant about his death, or the impact that his death had in this country and around the world as it pertains to equal rights for all American citizens. Now, the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s resulted in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, signed by President Johnson on July 2nd of 1964. It outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Voting rights were equal for all. Women gained the same privileges as men, as shown in the Title IX portion, which, among other things, gives equal status to both men and women's sports. A re-education is needed to make these young people aware of the importance of the civil rights movement and appreciate the sacrifices made by so many, including the beatings, the bombings, and the murders. Rights that they now take for granted, walking on the shoulders of those who came before them. In a similar manner, mass death, the way he died, and the reasons behind it, forced society to look at the blatant discrimination and lack of rights and protection given to the gay community. It was the next step in the movement to bring equality to all Americans. He too must not be forgotten, nor those who came before him in the fight for equal rights for the gay community, such as those brave souls involved in the June 28, 1969 Stonewall Rebellion in Greenwich Village, which is considered the first gay rights movement in America. Or Harvey Milk, the first openly gay man to be elected to public office in California, who was shot and killed on November 27, 1978, in San Francisco. So again, I ask, who is Matthew Shepard? He stood 5'2", weighed 110 pounds. He was fluent in English, German, and Italian, could make himself understood in Japanese and Arabic, and he was taking French when he died. He picked up languages like I pick up my socks. His dream was to work overseas, using his language skills to promote America and America's values. He dearly loved America and what it stood for. Matthew died October 12th, 1998. 6 days after being tied to a fence, his skull fractured in 18 places by the butt of a .357 Smith & Wesson pistol. And he was left for dead. He was 2 months short of his 22nd birthday. Matthew was gay. From my court statement. My son was taught to look at all sides of an issue before making a decision or taking a stand. He learned this early when he helped campaign for various political candidates while in grade school and junior high. When he did take a stand, it was based on his best judgment. Such a stand cost him his life when he quietly let it be known that he was gay. He didn't advertise it, but he didn't back away from the issue either. For that, I'll always be proud of him. He showed me that he's a lot more courageous than most people, including myself. Matthew knew that there were dangers to being gay, but he accepted that and wanted to just get on with his life and his ambition of helping others. Now, after his death, Judy had to make a decision. Should she go back to Saudi Arabia with me and pretend that she had only one son, or should she stay in the States, declare that she had two sons, and work to protect other kids and their families from becoming a victim of hate? She decided to stay and fight for three big reasons. First of all, she was proud of both of her sons. Second, she believed that every citizen of this country should have the same rights, gay or straight, including such areas as marriage, life and death, medical reasons, serving in the military, to live a normal life and enjoy all the rights that straight society currently enjoys. And third, and to me the most important of all, you never piss off a mother. Let me clarify this a little bit, this last statement. She was pissed off because, one, she loved her son, and her son was dead because he was considered different. Two, because she wanted to mourn the loss of her son and say goodbye to her firstborn. And how can that happen when there were bomb-sniffing dogs going through the church prior to the funeral services? You have 2 SWAT teams stationed near the church during his funeral services. And you have protesters outside the church before, during, and after her son's funeral services. Because an entire group of people lived in fear because they were biologically keyed and born to love someone of the same sex. Because she didn't want to hug another young man or young lady as he or she cried on Judy's shoulder and told of being bullied, rejected, and or kicked out of their home, and that Judy was the mother they wished they had. Because the laws weren't protecting those who needed protection. And because she couldn't act and react as a normal mourning mother during the trial of her son's murderers. Let me clarify this last statement a little bit more about the trial. 2 21-year-old men, Russell Henderson and Aaron McKinney, were arrested for the murder of Matt. Russell Henderson pled guilty to all charges before his trial began and was sentenced to 2 consecutive sentences, life sentences without parole. Aaron McKinney went to trial, and he subsequently received the same 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. Now, during Aaron McKinney's trial, I was still living and working in Saudi Arabia. Judy called me and said, the jury is about to receive direction. I hopped on a plane and flew back. I arrived the night before the jury was to be sequestered. They had been given directions on the procedures for deliberating and reaching a verdict. During the trial, Judy sat all alone in the front row, behind the prosecutor. No one else in that row, just listening and watching. All alone with her thoughts, her feelings, and her grief for her son. She heard the evidence given by the various witnesses, statements by law enforcement. She heard the descriptions of his injuries and the description of the autopsy performed. She saw the photos. Worst of all, she heard testimony that Matt may have been conscious the entire 18 hours that he was tied to that fence. She heard all this testimony while showing absolutely no emotion. Why? Because she'd been told that any display of emotions or reactions to anything she'd hear or see might be enough to allow the defense to appeal the verdict because she had unduly influenced the jury. To this day, I have no idea how she was able to do that. For all the reasons listed above, Judy stayed. And she traveled. And she spoke. And she lobbied. And she traveled. And she spoke. And she lobbied. More than 1 million air miles. Untold numbers of car miles, hours sitting in airports. No life. And the result of having no life of her own for more than 10 years is the expansion of the federal hate crime legislation, which is why you're here today. Now, it's obvious that the world didn't end, as so many said would happen when the president signed the hate crime bill. And I've been told by several people that the law which she fought so hard for was the trigger event that led to the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, because the world did not come to an end. And that is one of the reasons why DOMA is no longer being prosecuted. I can't express to you how proud I am of her and what she's accomplished. So why did Matt die? He, along with so many others, died because they were gay or they were perceived to be gay. They died because it was open season on all of them. Many died at the hands of others. Many more committed suicide, like the 2 young men in the last 30 days, because they gave up any hope of being considered equal. And they were worn out from the fear and the constant bullying. A suicide rate that is so much higher than you find in the straight community. Fear brought on by the terror and the worry of being attacked anytime, anywhere. This causes additional terror. Terror that's both mental and emotional. Fear to go out. Fear that the person coming up from behind or from the side is going to attack and hurt you. Again, it comes back to the concept of open season on the gay community and on those perceived to be gay or different. Now, I'm ashamed to admit it, but I terrorize kids in high school and college. I don't think it was intentional, but I see now that I did so. I tried to find those people and apologize. I think about it now and realize that I helped make their life hell on earth at a time when they were already under stress. I brushed off those I thought were weird, never realizing all they wanted was a hello and a smile to acknowledge that they were part of the human race. I used the words and never thought anything about it. Queer, faggot, homo. Came out of my mouth as easy as breathing. I told the jokes. Jesse James comes riding into town with his gang. A queer comes running up to him. Hey Jesse, what are you doing? We're here to burn the town, rape the women, and hang the queers. Well, Jesse, you have a good time. Not really that funny. And I can see where it would hurt. A couple years ago, one of my fraternity brothers called. After college, he just disappeared for 40 years. He was in Cheyenne, about 200 miles away, and wanted to know if I was going to be home that day. I said, I sure was. 3 hours later, there's a knock on my door. After a big hug and me yelling at him for disappearing, we had a beer. And then we had another one. Then we had another one. We stayed up most of the night. He drove up to tell us he was gay. And to thank us for the work we've been doing in Matt's name. Nobody knew it in college. He was thanking me, a person who unintentionally made his life miserable. You have no idea how humbling that was. So he stayed the night. He left the next day, promising to come back. We're making plans. He's bringing his partner, which is a good deal, because I have lots of blackmail stories that he can use. Now, what I did was no more than learned behavior. It's learned at home. It's learned at school. It's learned through your friends. It's learned through the media. And it's learned through law enforcement. Now, I have the utmost respect for law enforcement. every day when you walk out the door of your home, you go under immediate and incredible stress to protect the community, my friends, my family, never knowing if you'll come home. Stress that goes into your family life. However, I put a lot of the blame for Matt's death and the deaths of others from the gay community on law enforcement. Because you, most, not all, let's be clear about that, just laughed it off whenever a complaint of a beating or harassment came in from the gay community. You again, the majority, not all, but the majority, ignored the attacks and brushed off the beatings and the bullying. That just encouraged more attacks. You created the open season I mentioned earlier. Henderson and McKinney are perfect examples. They beat Matt because they figured no one would care because it's just another fag. And I quote that. Fortunately, this time the bad guys were wrong. Maybe if they just beaten him a little bit, things might have continued as before. But when that beating became a brutal and vicious murder, the men and women of the Albany County Sheriff's Department and the Laramie Police Department realized that they truly and honestly did care. I want to follow that up with this blunt statement to you in law enforcement. Regardless of whether you're local, county, state, or federal, whether you agree or disagree with the law, it is the law. You can't pick and choose what laws you want to enforce. You took an oath to protect and serve. That means protect and serve everyone, and that means enforce all the laws. And if you can't do that, you need to find another profession. And if that hurts your feelings, so be it. That's the way I feel. Reading from my statement, Matt's gift was people. He loved being with people, helping people and making others feel good. The hope of a better world, free of harassment and discrimination because a person was different, kept him motivated. All his life, he felt stabs of discrimination. Because of that, he was sensitive to other people's feelings. He was naive to the extent that, regardless of the wrongs people did to him, he still had faith that they would change and become nice. He trusted people, perhaps too much. Violence was not a part of his life until his senior year in high school. He would walk into a fight and try to break it up. He was the perfect negotiator. He could get two people talking to each other again as no one else could. He loved people and he trusted them. He could never understand how one person could hurt another physically or verbally. They would hurt him and he would give them another chance. This quality of seeing only good gave him friends around the world. He didn't see size, race, intelligence, sex, religion, or the 100 other things that people use to make choices about people. All he saw was the person. All he wanted was to make another person his friend. All he wanted was to make another person feel good. All he wanted was to be accepted as an equal. Now these days, old geezers like me are trying to lock in something that today's kids think is unimportant. So you're gay. So what? You want to marry your partner? Congratulations. They've grown up with Will and Grace, Modern Family, Adam Lambert, and Lady Gaga. They're more concerned with finding a job, paying off their debts, and watching Dancing with the Stars than they are about who is marrying or living with whom. And as a sidebar to today's kids, many corporations, when expanding to new cities, want to know if there's an active gay community. If there is, it's a sign of an open-minded, forward-looking location with high potential for attracting quality employees. And Nashville seems to be right in the middle of it. Congratulations for that. Now, last Father's Day, I didn't get a Father's Day card or my phone call from one of my two sons. Why? Because my son couldn't call. Why? Because my son is dead. Why? Because he was considered different. Matt once asked me in a moment of anguish, why was I born gay? Why can't I be like everyone else? My reply, son, God made you gay for a reason. You're still normal. Enjoy being who you are. You're going to make a difference in this world. And remember this, your mother, brother, and I will always love you, no matter what you do. I miss him very much. Again, from my statement. By the end of the beating, his body was just trying to survive. Mr. McKinney, you left him out there by himself, but he wasn't alone. There were his lifelong friends with him, friends that he had grown up with. You're probably wondering who these friends were. First, he had the beautiful night sky with the same stars and moon that we used to look at through a telescope. Then he had the daylight and the sun to shine on him one more time. One more cool, wonderful autumn day in Wyoming. His last day alive in Wyoming. His last day alive in the state that he always proudly called home. And through it all, he was breathing in for the last time the smell of Wyoming sagebrush and the scent of pine trees from the snowy range. He heard the wind, the ever-present Wyoming wind, for the last time. He had one more friend with him, one he grew to know and love through his time in Sunday school and as an acolyte at St. Mark's in Casper, as well as through his visits to St. Matthew's in Laramie. He had God. I feel better knowing he wasn't alone. Today we have the Matthew Shepard James Byrd Jr. hate prevention law that increases the protection and civil rights of American citizens. However, the struggle continues. Discrimination still continues. I ask all of you to become more active in your local and state communities to help stop the bullying, to help end discrimination, and to help ensure that all American citizens have all the same rights and that these rights are equal rights. The most important way of doing this is by voting. Know the issues and the stands taken by the candidates. Vote. Then hold these elected officials accountable. They work for you. You don't work for them. Question them, write them, call them if they are not meeting your expectations. As Judy says, Do not become part of the sick society, silent, indifferent, complacent. You, all of you, hold the power to make change, not the lobbyists. I repeat, vote, follow up, verify, then vote again. From my statement. When Matt was little, I used to take showers with him just to teach him not to be scared of the water. Later, Matt helped me do the same thing with Logan. Anyways, Matt and I would be in the shower spitting mouthfuls of water at each other or at his mother if he could convince her to come into the bathroom. Then he would laugh and laugh. We would also sing in the showers. I taught him the songs Row, Row, Row Your Boat, both Brother John and his French version, Frère Jacques, and Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Matt would sing loud and clear. Now that voice is silent. The boat has sunk. Jacques no longer has a frère. And the little star no longer twinkles. One last thing, and it's the most important of all. If you remember nothing else about what I've said today, remember this. Matthew was not my gay son. He was my son, who happened to be gay. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dennis. At this time, we're going to take a short 10-minute break. If you can, there's refreshments in the lobby. We would like for you to come back in 10 minutes so we can get the program started. Again, Dennis, thank you for being here. Tell Judy we missed her. She's here in spirit. And thank you all, for both of you, for what you do in the memory of Matthew. Thank you.
In Judy's life in the aftermath of Matthew's death. We're going to turn our attention now to looking at the law, to finding out how we can work within the law and with our law enforcement officers to help keep our community safe. This gives me an opportunity to introduce to you Assistant U.S. Attorney Blanche Cook. I can tell you that our public officials work into the wee hours. She and I have had phone conversations and emails passing at times when the rest of us are asleep. Blanche is one of those people who is on the front lines prosecuting the people who do us harm. She's a graduate of Vassar College, University of Michigan Law School, 6 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Nashville, and we're happy to have her here. Prior to that, she was in private practice as a labor and employment attorney in Chicago. Please welcome to the podium, she's actually already here, Ms. Blanche Cook.
Much and good morning to all of you. A few things. One, I wanted to thank Carolyn Blackwell, Executive Director of Metro Human Relations Commission. She's absolutely right. Carolyn is a fearless and tireless worker. I also wanted to thank Community Relations Service, our partners in the Department of Justice. Most importantly, I also wanted to reach out to Dennis Shepard. I certainly hope that the work we do in our office honors your son's legacy. Initially, I just wanted to set some groundwork for all of us. I have a limited amount of time, but I do encourage you to ask me questions. I encourage you to ask me questions because it makes me much more responsive to what you want to hear. And in addition, if you don't, I have slides and slides and slides of legal elements to federal statutes that I can go over in detail with you. That would be my area of expertise. I'm more than willing to subject you to that. Before I go on any further, how many of you are familiar with our office, and that is the United States Attorney's Office for the Middle District of Tennessee? That's a sizable number of people. I'm not asking you if you're personally familiar with our office. Just a general idea. For those of you who are not familiar with the United States Attorney's Office in the Middle District of Tennessee, we are the chief federal law enforcement officers in the district. It's our primary responsibility to prosecute federal crimes and also to litigate civil actions involving the United States. There are 93 United States Attorney's offices throughout the nation. They are all headed by a United States Attorney. The United States Attorney here in the Middle District of Tennessee is Jerry Martin. He was appointed by President Obama. I need to draw a distinction between our office and the district attorneys. We are not the district attorneys or the assistant district attorneys. The district attorneys are prosecutors and lawyers for the state. They prosecute state laws. They prosecute and litigate in state courts. We work on behalf of the federal government, specifically the Department of Justice. We practice in federal courts. We work in tandem with federal agencies, but also local law enforcement, and we enforce federal laws. Very briefly, there are all kinds of laws. There are state laws, municipal laws, federal laws. It would take the rest of the day to define exactly what a federal law is in distinction to a state law, but just very briefly, two categories of laws that you may be familiar with are laws that affect interstate transportation of goods and services. That would fall under the rubric of a federal law. If you were to commit a crime on federal property, that may be a federal law that you're familiar with. So if, for example, you were to commit murder in a national park, that could be prosecuted as a federal crime. If you speed on the Natchez Trace, that in fact is a federal crime. It won't rise to the occasion of a felony, but it would be a misdemeanor. So having stated the civics journey of this all, I wanted to get to the meat of the matter, at least for purposes of my presentation. There are essentially three goals within the time that I have that I wanted to go over with you. And they are: what are hate crimes, how they are prosecuted, and most importantly, what you should do if you are the victim of a hate crime. I definitely want to allot time to go over that. There's a distinction to be drawn between criminal enforcement of civil rights and civil enforcement of civil rights. The main distinction is jail time. If you have a criminal crime, that is a crime that will involve a deprivation of liberty because that would involve a criminal sentence. A civil prosecution is one in which you have damages. So I wanted to draw that distinction at the outset. There is a broad rubric of civil rights laws. There is a broad rubric of hate crimes and hate crime legislation. But I wanted to focus in on a couple of specific areas and also to make sure that you understand the basic elements of what a hate crime is, particularly as a criminal offense. A hate crime is some sort of violent, intimidating offense like murder, arson, or vandalism, but it has the added dimension of being motivated by some sort of bias. So it is very much a traditional crime for purposes of hate crimes, like vandalism, like murder. But the added dimension to all of this is that it is motivated by your membership in a protected category. Those protected categories are race, ethnicity, national origin, sex, religion, sexual orientation, or disability. The part about hate crimes that I want you to come away from understanding is the difficulty of proving that a case or a crime is motivated by your protected status, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. But I do want you to tune into that. very quickly, just so that you understand the protected categories. The protected categories do not include your hair color, do not include your political affiliation or what political party you belong to. There is no protection under federal law for size discrimination, although there may be those protections under state law. Now, before any of you break out in umbrage or flay your arms in questioning this, I'm not suggesting that there shouldn't be other categories that are protected. I'm simply saying that these are the categories that are currently recognized now and the categories that are not recognized. Similarly, there are no federal protections for tattooing, piercing, being loud, being shy, being noisy. Those are not protected categories. Again, it goes to your race, your ethnicity, your national origin, your gender, disability, sexual orientation, perceived sexual orientation, sexual identity, and I think I mentioned religion. To set this in some sort of context, there are a number of people who make an argument that we have arrived as a society and that there is no longer any need for hate crimes, or that hate crimes should be punishable like any other kind of offense, or they're just not interested in pursuing the issue of hate crimes at all because for whatever reason they find it disturbing to them. To put this in some sort of historical context and give it a contemporary slant, I pulled these records from the FBI website. But just to give you an idea of what is going on out there, in 2007, the FBI documented 7,621 hate crime incidents, amounting to nearly 1 incident per hour per year. 50% of the reported hate crimes were motivated by racial bias, 18% religious bias, 17% sexual orientation bias, 13% ethnic national origin bias. The number of reported crimes directed at Latinos have steadily increased, a 40% increase between 2003 and 2007. I'm going to flash through some of these slides given the time that I have. But again, I just wanted to provide some sort of contemporary context in which you could view this. At some level, I'm preaching to the choir because people who are interested in spending an entire day devoted to hate crimes are probably not the people that I have to convince that there should be hate crimes. But to the extent that we're all here to look at this in its entirety, we're talking about a gamut of different kinds of crimes committed toward a gamut of different kinds of people, and I just wanted to get us on the same page there. What you have in front of you is Title 18 United States Code, Section 241. It is the go-to statute for a lot of hate crimes. I will get to the Matthew Shepard, James Beard Act in just a moment. But I also wanted to bring this to your attention because this is a statute that is used very commonly to prosecute a lot of different kinds of hate crimes. And I will demonstrate to you why it is a bit more easy of a statute to deal with for federal prosecutors. But Section 241 makes it a violation, a federal violation, to conspire to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate another person in the exercise or enjoyment of their rights under the United States Constitution. The penalty is up to 10 years in prison and up to life if the offense involved kidnapping, aggravated sexual abuse, attempt to kill, or death penalty if death results. Now, again, I'm preaching to the choir, but there's important misconceptions that I need to clarify for all of us. These laws, these hate crime laws, do not regulate your thought. Are we all clear there? These laws do not regulate your thinking. Everyone okay there? What we're doing is criminalizing your conduct, right? So it's not that we're criminalizing any ideas that you might have about racial supremacy or homophobia. I'm not suggesting those are good things, but I want to make sure that you understand it is not the thought process that's being regulated through these laws, it is your conduct, okay? When you actually take an act to work with someone else in some sort of concerted activity to deprive someone else of their constitutional rights, that kind of conduct would fall under this statute. The other thing I need to mention for everyone, and again, I think I'm preaching to the choir here, is that we're all protected by these laws. These are not specialty laws that only give certain segments of our society protection. They are protections that are open to all of us. Any questions thus far? Any at all? Okay. I'll advance now to Section 245. Section 245, also of Title 18, is another criminal statute used in the prosecution of a number of hate crimes and a number of crimes that involve discrimination. Under Section 245, it is criminal to willfully injure, intimidate, or interfere with any person or attempt to do so by forcing or threatening force because of that person's race, color, religion, or national origin, as it relates to their participation in certain activities, and I'll go through a couple of bullet points of those examples. The first example, if you are a student for admission to public schools or college, if someone interferes with your right to do that on the basis of your protected category, that would fall under Section 245. That might rise to the occasion of a Section 245 violation, depending on what the evidence is. A participant in a benefit service, privilege, program, facility, or activity provided or administered by state or local government, that would also fall within the rubric of protected activity. The applicant for private or state employment, private or state employee member, or applicant for membership in a labor organization or hiring hall, or an applicant for employment through employment agency, labor organization, or hiring hall. If that is the activity that you are engaged in, and once again you are prohibited or interfered with, or there is an attempt to interfere with your participation in that kind of activity, that would fall under Section 245. If you are a juror or prospective juror in a state court, if you're a traveler or user of a facility of interstate commerce or common carrier, if you are a patron of a public accommodation or place of exhibition or entertainment, including hotels, motels, restaurants, and stadiums, again, if you are interfered with, if this kind of activity is interfered with because of your protected category, that again would be a rise to the occasion of a federal offense. The Matthew Shepard and James Beard Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2009 is obviously an extremely important piece of legislation, particularly in the area of hate crimes. As Mr. Shepard told you, this was passed in 2009. It did a number of remarkable things. Most importantly, prior to the Shepard-Beard Act, there were hate crimes protections for race and ethnicity and religion. The Shepard-Beard Act opened the scope of protected categories to include gender, sexual orientation, and perceived sexual identity. If we look at the statute pretty carefully, and I want to spend some time on this so that I have some clarity in terms of our presentation here, these are the elements that are necessary to prosecute this kind of case. It is the willful causing of bodily injury or attempting to do so using fire, firearm, or other dangerous weapon when the crime was committed because of the actual or perceived race, color, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability of any person, and that is punishable by 10 years to life in prison. There again, what we're looking at here under the Shepard-Beard Act is there should be, for purposes of prosecution, an element of an assault or some sort of harmful touching. In addition to having some sort of harmful touching, there has to be evidence that this crime was committed because of your membership in a protected category. And let me offer this to you. What would be some of the kinds of evidence that you might have that would substantiate a claim that this was done, this harmful act was done, this assault was done, this arson was done for reasons related to a protected activity? Anyone? Pardon? Exactly, racial epithets, slurs, that kind of evidence. When someone actually externalizes their motivation through some sort of word or through some sort of action, like, for example, spray painting swastikas, that would be an externalization and evidence that could be used to prove that someone was racially biased or biased because of your sexual orientation or your gender or your religion, any of those protected categories. And it's important that you understand that, because at the end of this presentation, I wanted to give some pointers about what you should do if you believe that you have been the victim of a hate crime. I'm going to move very, very quickly right now through all of the various federal laws that protect hate crimes into the realm of human trafficking and particularly sexual trafficking. The rubric of hate crimes is a very broad rubric. There's a lot of different things that get prosecuted as hate crimes. There is an even broader array of litigation involving civil rights. I wanted to mention to you sexual trafficking. Right now in the Middle District of Tennessee, we are engaged in one of the largest human trafficking cases in our nation. There are approximately 30 defendants, somewhere between 200 to 300 witnesses, over 600 pieces of evidence. We plan to be in trial for 2 to 3 months. We anticipate being in trial at the end of March. The case involves the sexual trafficking of young girls. Now, least any of you walk away from this forum believing that sexual trafficking is something that's done on Skid Row or something that's done in the dark. You should be aware that a number of these cases involve suburbs, in which these are suburban teens, male and female, who for whatever reason may feel alienated either socioeconomically, racially, or perhaps some other reason related to a protected category, but are nonetheless very lonely and also very vulnerable. Those people are exploited by people who are more than willing to sexually traffic them. I leave you with this because it's very important that you understand that these are not just some segment of society that you're unfamiliar with. This is the kind of conduct that may be happening right under your own nose. It is very important, I think, for all of us to realize that the safety of every member in our community belongs to all of us, particularly our children. Having said that, I am going to speed through the rest of this presentation to get to some actual practical tips for all of us. As I stated, or as I could say in about a half an hour, there are about 20 different laws that I can go through that protect your civil rights with respect to discrimination. Discrimination in housing, discrimination in employment, discrimination in voting. All of those laws are in place, and you have a district or a U.S. Attorney's Office that is committed to aggressively engaging these kinds of crimes. However, part of the mission of our forum today is to engage you in a partnership. If you don't make us aware of these crimes, we may not be aware of these crimes. So what I want is to make sure that you understand as community members what actions you should take if you believe you have been victimized by some sort of hate crime. The first of these is relatively obvious, and that is to call the police. If you believe that you have been the victim of some sort of hate crime, you should contact the police and you should contact them right away. In addition, you should write down as much detail about the crime as possible. As I stated to you earlier, the element of hate crimes that is sometimes difficult for purposes of prosecution is proving that someone has done something to you because of your protected category. It is the rare instance that someone will come up to you with a gun and say, okay, white man, this is the last that you are going to see, and I'm going to kill you because you are both white and also male. However, if you believe that you are the victim of a hate crime, it is imperative that you preserve the evidence and you write down the crime in as much detail as possible, that you take as much of a description as possible of the perpetrator, their size, their height, their weight, as much of a physical description as you possibly can, and any distinguishing characteristics. It is also very important that you chronicle everything that was said and everything that was done. You would be surprised at how much these details become very important to us during the course of an investigation and also during the course of the litigation. If you believe that you have been the victim of a hate crime, again, it's important that you preserve any evidence that you have, any videos that you've taken with your phone, any photographs that you've taken with your phone. If, for example, that you believe that you have been involved in any kind of interaction with someone in the public and that you've been deprived of something or that you've been assaulted in some way and you believe that that is related to your protected category, to the extent that you can film this, to the extent that you can photograph this, that is invaluable evidence that can later be used in a prosecution. I also encourage you to write down the responding officer's name and badge number, to the extent that this might get lost in an array of very, very busy activity. This is something that you can track. It is also something that you can follow up on. It is imperative that before you leave the crime, that you ask that a police report be done and that you get the number, the case number for this particular incident, as well as the badge and name of the police officer who responds. Again, you want to make sure that the officer completes a report. Get a copy of the report and/or incident number. To the extent that you can, get a copy of the report. You may be in an area where there isn't a Xerox copier, but to the extent that you can get a copy of the report, please do get a copy of the report, even if that means that you have to follow up at the police precinct. When you are filling out a report with a police officer, make sure that you tell that police officer that you are reporting this as a hate crime. There may be someone or someones who may not have been subjected to hate crimes or discrimination. And for them, it is very difficult to see that this possibly could be motivated by the fact that you're Jewish, or the fact that you practice Islam, or the fact that you may be Native American, or the fact that you may be homosexual. So it is imperative that you tell that officer that I am reporting this as a hate crime. I would like that noted in the report, and that also helps the officer funnel this particular crime to the right areas in which it can be investigated as a hate crime. If you feel that you have not been assisted properly, it's imperative that you follow up, and this may involve a call to the precinct to follow up on this particular report of what has happened to you. In addition, it is imperative that if you believe that you have been involved in some sort of hate crime, to the extent that you can and to the extent that you are comfortable, that you reach out perhaps to a community organization that would represent your interests. Given the web, there are tons of groups and organizations out there who would be more than willing to assist you in redressing a problem that you may have had with respect to a hate crime. To the extent that you have to follow up on this crime aggressively to make sure that it is being prosecuted, it certainly would not hurt you to have help from a community organization that is organized and may have done something like this already. Again, there's an abundance of information on the web, contact numbers that you can call, 1-800 numbers that you can call, foundations that might be able to assist you, and or the other organizations. I am going to conclude this unless someone has some questions. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
Can we get a copy of your PowerPoint?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you'd like to come up to me during the break, what I'll do is, I'm sure Caroline needs one more thing to do. If you come up to me during the break and give me a business card, I'll make sure that I get this either emailed or mailed to you. Any other questions? Thank you so much for your time. It's a good thing when we can actually interact with the community in which we serve. Thank you very much.
Talk with her. If she can do that, that we'll be able to have her continuing expertise as part of this event today. Right now, I'd like to bring up to the podium two additional law enforcement officers. This is our time for you all to meet and understand and know some of the people who are working on our behalf. Special Agent Mary Beth Wright and Special Agent Steve Fogarty. I want to share with you that one of the things that I heard in the last week and a half that has been absolutely inspiring about in the development of this event is that the Shepherds love the FBI. And I heard that from Mary Beth when she said to me, Caroline, had you thought about having Judy and Dennis Shepard come to the forum? And this was probably the Thursday before Martin Luther King Day weekend, and I said no, and she said, well, I have a friend, and maybe we can work that out. And so during the course of that weekend, she wrote the Shepherds, I wrote the Shepherds, she wrote her friend first, and we got an introduction, and that resulted in Dennis's decision to come here this weekend. So we owe a debt of appreciation and gratitude to the FBI for their diligence in working on our behalf and for their willingness to partner with organizations like the Metro Human Relations Commission. Thank you so much.
Hi, good morning. First, I'd like to thank Caroline Blackwell for inviting the FBI to present today. We are very, very honored to be here. My name is Mary Beth Wright. I'm a special agent with the FBI. I work on the White Collar Crime Squad. I investigate primarily civil rights violations. Today, in my presentation, I'm going to discuss the FBI Civil Rights Program, as well as some case studies. The FBI currently has jurisdiction over violations in more than 200 categories of federal law. They generally fall under our 3 national security priorities and our 5 criminal priorities. As you guys can see, the 5th priority of the FBI is civil rights violations that we investigate. The mission of the FBI Civil Rights Program is to enforce federal civil rights statutes and ensure that protected rights of all people are not abridged. The FBI Civil Rights Program is broken down into 4 sub-programs: hate crimes, color of law, human trafficking, and the FACE Act. The FBI's #1 priority with the sub-programs is hate crimes. And the reason for that is because hate crimes have a devastating impact on families and communities, but also because the groups that preach hatred and intolerance plant the seeds of terrorism in our country. You may ask, can hate crime be committed with words alone? The use of bigoted and prejudiced language does not in itself violate hate crimes. This type of offense is frequently classified as a bias incident. However, when words threaten violence, or when violence-motivated graffiti damages or destroys property, hate crime laws may apply. The FBI's jurisdiction pertaining to hate crimes is primarily predicated on 5 federal statutes. These statutes generally require 3 parts: the use of force or the threat of force or conspiracy to use of threatened force. Second, the targeting of a victim because of race, color, religion, or national origin, and in the case of only housing, disability, gender, or familial status. And finally, additional motive to injure, intimidate, or interfere with some specific federally protected activity or right. There we go. Okay, this next slide is the results of the 2010 Uniform Crime Reporting Hate Crime Statistics Program. The results represent approximately 92% of the nation's population. Of that, about approximately 15,000 law enforcement agencies submitted their data. And of that, approximately 2,000 law enforcement agencies reported that a hate crime incident had occurred in their jurisdiction. This made up approximately 6,624 involved single bias incidents, which showed 47% were race motivated, 20% was religion, 19.3% sexual orientation, 12.8% ethnicity, national origin, and 0.6% disability. It's a little tricky. Okay. All right. Has anyone ever been successfully prosecuted in the United States for sending racist threats via email? The answer is yes. In 1998, Richard Machado was the first individual to be convicted of a federal electronic mail hate crime. Machado was a former student at the University of California. He was convicted of violating the civil rights of 59 mostly Asian students by sending threatening email messages signed by Asian Hater. His messages stated, quote, "I personally will make it my life's work to find and kill every one of you personally, okay? That's how determined I am. Do you hear me?" He threatened to kill them if they did not withdraw their enrollment from school. Machado was sentenced to 1 year in prison. On January 17, 2011, as hundreds of people gathered in downtown Spokane, Washington to participate in the Martin Luther King Jr. Day Parade, Kevin Harpin placed his backpack bomb along the parade route at Washington Street and Main Avenue. City workers discovered the suspicious package before the march started. The Spokane Police and Sheriff's Office bomb squad were called in and disarmed the device, which enabled evidence to be preserved. There was no particular tip that led to the capture of Harpin. Rather, it was evidence from the bomb itself. The detonator was a remote car starter purchased over the internet. The shrapnel, which would have maimed victims, was lead fishing weights purchased from Walmart from Harpin's debit card. Harpin's DNA was on the handle of the backpack that held the bomb. After the arrest, the officers found deleted photos of digital camera that included pictures of Harpin at the parade and pictures of young black children gathering at the march. The judge asked Harpin if he placed the bomb in an effort to hurt people because of their race, color, national origin. Harpin replied yes. In a plea agreement on September 7, 2011, Harpin pled guilty to the use of weapon of mass destruction and the Hate Crimes Act. He was sentenced on December 20, 2011 to 32 years. James Byrd Jr. was a black male who was murdered by 3 white men asserted to be white supremacists during a racially motivated crime in Jasper, Texas on June 7, 1998. Sean Berry, Lawrence Brewer, and John King dragged Byrd behind a pickup truck along an asphalt road after they wrapped a heavy logging chain around his ankles. Byrd was pulled along for about 3 miles as the truck swerved from side to side. Byrd, who remained conscious throughout most of the ordeal, was killed when his body hit the edge of a culvert, severing his right arm and his head. The murderers drove on for another mile before dumping his torso in front of an African-American cemetery in Jasper. Brewer, King, and Berry were tried and convicted of capital murder. Brewer and King received the death penalty, and Berry was sentenced to life imprisonment. Brewer later claimed that Byrd's throat had been slashed by Berry before he was dragged. However, forensic evidence suggests that Byrd had been attempting to keep his head up while being dragged, and an autopsy suggested that Byrd was alive during much of the dragging. Sean Berry stated, "You're just having a little fun." Brewer was executed on September 21, 2011 by lethal injection. The day before his execution, Brewer told a Houston News reporter, quote, "As far as any regrets, no, I have no regrets. No, I do it all over again to tell you the truth." King currently remains on Texas death row while appeals are pending. Byrd's lynching by dragging gave impetus to passage of a Texas hate crimes law. It later led to the federal October 22, 2009 Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, commonly known as the Matthew Shepard Act. President Obama signed the bill into law on October 28, 2009. The new law expands protection provided by the 1969 United States Federal Hate Crime Law to include crimes motivated by a victim's actual or perceived gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability, in addition to the existing categories of race, color, religion, and national origin. Okay. Finally, on January 19, 2012, the U.S. Department announced that a federal grand jury in Houston indicted 4 white suspects on federal hate crime charges related to what prosecutors say was racially motivated assault of a 29-year-old man last summer. The police arrested 4 suspects shortly after the incident. Each was charged with misdemeanor assault and the beating. Each faced 1 additional count of violating the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act. This is the third time nationally that prosecutors have brought charges under the Act. Okay, it's my partner. I think he's going to speak.
Hey, good morning. Can anybody hear me? I think you're trading my name up here, so I'm going to see if this mic works. If not, can you hear me back there?
Yeah, you can use that mic, but you can't walk around.
I tell my wife I like to walk, and she says the reason you do that is because a moving target's harder to hit. Just a couple things I'd like to talk about. We'll get into a quick case study that's local, kind of give you some local, flavor, so to speak, for what's going on. I think that what we had years ago, we had things that were fostered. I think Mr. Shepherd alluded to it in his sort of blunt comment about law enforcement and attitudes. And I'd like to think that he's right, that those things have changed as he talks about Will and Grace and talking about the songs and Lady Gaga, things I haven't watched yet. But I will tell you one thing about the law enforcement that's done for me in 22 years. In 9 years as a policeman and a detective, and almost 13 and a half years as an FBI agent, I have had the luxury of an education that puts me in public housing one day, in a mansion the next, talking to people of all races, colors, ethnicities, every background you can imagine. And it has been an invaluable lesson for me. Let me just give you a couple of examples. I had the opportunity to go to Saudi Arabia years ago. We're helping the Saudi Arabian National Police, Mubahad is what they call it. Can you hear me? Go back. Okay, so I'll be a stationary target. I had the opportunity to work with them, and we were out one night, and Saudi Arabia tends to get a little hot. So we're working about 10 o'clock at night, and they stop to break. And they're going to sit down, and one of the other agents comes over to me and says, well, they're going to take a break, they're going to have a snack. And I'm like, hey, great, it's 10 o'clock at night, but it's 95, 100 degrees outside. So we sit down in the courtyard, and what do we have? Hot tea and figs or dates. And we got to sit down and talk. And even when we work with people, when you get to sit down and talk with people from a different culture, a different religion, it opens your eyes to how they think and what their background is and why it's important to them. I was lucky enough to go to Puerto Rico. While I was in Puerto Rico, I'd go out to eat with one of the Policía de Puerto Rico officers. And I'd go into the restaurant, and he would shake his finger and go, en español solamente. So I said, in Spanish. Well, unless I wanted the pollo, chicken, or hamburguesa, I needed to figure out a little bit more of the language. And one thing I will tell you about Puerto Ricans, when you try to speak Spanish, even the bad, broken Spanish I spoke, they were so welcoming because I was making an attempt here in Puerto Rico to speak the language. Not everybody is as open-minded or as educated, and unfortunately that brings law enforcement into the picture. And we'll talk a little bit about, and I won't read it to you, but the Islamic Center in Colombia, familiar with that from 2008? Basically, in the early morning hours of February, the 911 center in Murray County received a phone call that there was a structure fire located at the Islamic Center on South Main Street. Now, there were no injuries or deaths. The police and the fire department responded. And you can see the fire was pretty significant. There was a number of law enforcement agencies that came to the table. The Columbia Police, Tennessee Bomb and Arson, the FBI, and the ATF. And this is the aftermath of the fire. Now, when Blanche talked a little bit about things that we look for, when we're investigating these crimes and we come to bear, what do we need to do? Well, we have a crime scene to work. So State Bomb and Arson goes in, they do a great job. They find the remnants of a Molotov cocktail, which would qualify as a destructive device. They continue to look around, and what do we see? Well, we see the swastika. Additionally, and let me make sure I have this right, you can see where the glass was found here in the back. Once the crime scene was worked, then the investigation began with a neighborhood canvass, and it's not science, it's about going out and talking to the public and getting the public's help. A neighborhood canvass at a convenience store after pulling the register receipts, so to purchase for $5 of gasoline about 4 o'clock in the morning. As a result of talking to the patrolman, and as a 22-year law enforcement veteran, let's make no mistake, the rubber meets the road with the patrolman on the street. He had observed some individuals out earlier in the evening, or in the early morning hours, and he knew them, and he knew their truck. And they had been by the Islamic Center at 5, the officer had, and there was no problem. We had seen them earlier. So based on the footage from the surveillance video, they took the officer back there, and he goes, well, yeah, that's the guy's truck right there, and here's his name. You run a registration check, sure enough, this guy has got a truck similar to that registered to him. So what do you do next? You go to the house. When you go to the house, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's spray paint located in the truck. Spray paint, great evidence. Next. Cash register receipt for a purchase of gasoline. Additionally, there was a burglary and there was a stereo that was taken. That was subsequently recovered because it was described by the people at the Islamic Center, and it was described and linked to the suspects eventually. And there were some significant penalties. If you can take a look, and I won't read them for you, there were some significant penalties brought to bear courtesy of a successful prosecution by the United States Attorney's Office here in the Middle District of Tennessee. So, I think we're running out of time, and I don't want to get yanked off with a hook to the side here in a minute because I'm not moving. But I can tell you that, I haven't been here long. I came off the Navajo Indian Reservation after 4 years working major crimes on the Navajo Indian Reservation. I can tell you as I was leaving, the story that was alluded to earlier by the gentleman that did the initial introduction about the mentally disabled Navajo man in Farmington. He suffered from fetal alcohol syndrome. He had gotten lost. He was trying to get back home. He went to the McDonald's. He was befriended, so to speak. After he was befriended by these 3 guys there, they take him back to the apartment. And I apologize, I don't have the photographs, but basically they took him back there and they shaved a swastika in the back of his head down to the skin. They got a cell phone and were trying to make it look like that he was complicit in what they were doing to him, whether they wrote white power on his back, or when they took the coat hanger after putting a towel in his mouth, heated it on the stove, and branded his arm. They've been prosecuted successfully federally under these hate crime laws. So just a couple of stories out there. I could go on for days, but our time is running short. We're committed to working with our partners from Metro and everyone else to do what we can do, and we just ask the public to do what you can do to be good witnesses and call us if you see something. Thank you very much.
Steve, I so understand not wanting to stand behind a podium. Before we go to lunch, we're going to have a few more minutes with one of our TBI investigators, Dale Armour. Dale Armour has been a law enforcement for, oh gosh, I couldn't even count up the number of years. He's another veteran agent. Dale is a special agent with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and is the assistant special agent in charge. I'd appreciate you welcoming Dale.
Thank you. I realize this is going to be just before lunch. I've just got a few moments to introduce my agency to you and what our response to hate crimes would be. I think I need to go back into history a little bit. Most people are not aware that the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and how our authority is listed. We're not out in the public generally like your normal police department where they're very popular or very visual. Back about 60 years ago, up in rural East Tennessee, there was a violent homicide. Local sheriff's department responds. They were very ill prepared to handle the investigation. They stepped on evidence, they messed up evidence, the case went dormant. Mr. John Jones at that time was the, he was the editor of the Greenville paper, and he saw a need 60 years ago that local law enforcement needed help. Now, if you're from Nashville, Metropolitan Police Department can do anything out there that needs to be done in law enforcement. But if you take this step back and go into a rural county where they don't have the benefit of training experience, they may not ever see a homicide for 2 or 3 years. That was the reason that Mr. Jones with the Tennessee Press Association made the cry that we needed a state bureau of investigation that could assist local agencies to do their investigations when needed and when called upon. I believe it was 1951, the legislature heard that cry from the Tennessee Press Association. We were created as the Tennessee Bureau of Criminal Identification, and we were assigned to the Department of Safety, basically as a plainclothes division. At that time, we worked exactly like we were told, and I believe in the original time with TBI, I believe there was only about 6 agents working 95 counties. We have now expanded that with the laboratory. I think we're about 225 agents statewide. 75 of those are assigned to the forensic scientist unit or the laboratories across the state. The rest of the agents are scattered out amongst the counties. They live in the counties where they work. They go to church there. Children go to school. They go to ball games. They are part of the community as agents. In the early 80s, there was a call that because of our responsibilities had grown, that they needed to make an independent form of government agency, and that's how the TBI was created as you know it today. The legislature saw fit that we need to be removed from the political auspice, I guess, of a state agency, and when they created us, they re-christened us the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. My director serves a 6-year term that overlaps the governor to give us that independence to do investigations as needed to be. Our responsibility is still to the citizens. When it comes to hate crime investigations, the closest that I can tell you that under Tennessee law that we would be involved in would be a Civil Rights Intimidation Act, which is a felony, and also there's a misdemeanor portion to it. Because of the TBI and what our state law reads, we're probably going to work a biased case basically on what was actually done. If there was a homicide there, we're going to work it under the statute for homicide. If it's an arson, vandalism, assault, that's how we're going to work it. The motivator then would be whatever, like we said today, would be Ms. Blanche did an excellent job of explaining the differences here. Once we get involved in that, but the thing that you need to take away from here, the TBI cannot initiate an investigation into a hate crime without being invited in by the District Attorney General. Our authority under state law is that we have the authority to work political corruption. We've got a politician out here that needs to be investigated. If we have fugitive drug investigations, domestic terrorism, gang affiliation, several white-collar crime cases, Medicaid fraud, a handful of others, we can actually walk out and initiate an investigation without contacting anyone. If there is a homicide victim laying on the front steps of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation headquarters this morning, we have got to be invited into that investigation to work it. What that means is that either a phone call will be made to the District Attorney General, the State District Attorney General, or the District Attorney General will call and invite us into an investigation. Once we are invited into that investigation, we have the full force and authority of the agency to do what we need to do. We have the forensics unit that will be responding, and I will tell you, I've watched some CSI shows, and I've gone over to our laboratory, and they're 2 separate animals, guys. They don't do the same thing. It's just not as popular on television, I mean, in our office as it is on. But we would bring forth whatever resources we have, whether that is to a local agency out here or if it's to our federal partners. You know, I was listening, and when I wrote my bio for Ms. Carolyn, I got thinking about it. You know, in 2005, I was given the Special Agent of the Year award. Part of that responsibility was because the job that I had at the time, I apprehended 1,200 fugitives from justice over a 2-year period. But I didn't do that by myself. You do that by reaching out to other people, other agencies, other people in your department, and that's how you create that network to get the job done. We're not an island. We need you. We need the press. We need our fellow agents, our fellow agencies, our other police departments, whether that is a deputy sheriff working in a rural county in East Tennessee or it's an FBI agent in Washington, D.C., we need to make sure those networks are there and that we can reach out and work together. And I think that's the one thing that we've seen here What I've seen since I've been here, everybody's coming together for a reason. It's a common ground, and that's what we're here for. I know I'm throwing this kind of fast to you, but lunch is just around the corner according to my schedule, and I was trying to cut this short. If there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. I can go all day long about how great the TBI is, but I want to leave you with something before I do. My deputy director is the number 2 man in our agency. He was an agent. He's worked his way up. His responsibilities today are basically administration, make sure we got bullets in our gun to go to the range, there's gas in the car to drive back and forth where we need to go to, handling the legislature. His job is administration. I have worked for that man for years. In his office, on his bookcase, there is a picture of a young girl. I'll be honest with you, for years I thought maybe it might be a niece. One day, just conversation had kind of lulled a little bit, and I said, Jeff, who's the picture of? This is the number 2 man in our bureau, and he looked at me and he said, Dale, that was a victim of a homicide. I asked her parents to give me that picture, and I leave it on my bookcase so that I remember what our responsibilities are and why we do the job we do. That is pretty much the dedication, and I can tell you that as honestly and truthfully as I can, just about every member of our agency feels that way. And our motto and our mission statement is very, very brief. It's that we don't let innocent suffer and we don't let the guilty escape. And that is what we live by every day. And that's what you see every day out here when you call the TBI. If you call us, we're going to try to help you or get you to where you need to go. If we don't have the authority to work it, or we may have to have you call the district attorney's office, or we may in turn call them for you. But anyway, that's all I've got as far as closing remarks. If there's any questions, if not, I'm going to let you go to lunch. Yes, sir.
What does TBI do in terms of cyber crimes, local cyber?
We have a unit that does, through ICAC, the Internet Childs Against, and I'm sorry, I don't work that unit, but they go out into the computers. They do go out and do the investigation that needs to be done. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question right. We do have a unit that is dedicated strictly to that type of crimes. If there's a child pornographer out here who's posting images online, if there's someone trying to obtain a child, our human trafficking that we're starting up now is going hand in hand with that. Yes, sir.
So we've heard from various law enforcement agencies today. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but as a citizen, the important thing to remember is if you experience or witness a crime, you're not supposed to try to figure out which agency to contact. You're supposed to call the police.
Correct.
And the police will determine what agency is best.
That's correct. And there's 95 counties in the state. We go from Memphis all the way up to Johnson City. You have a lot of different variations because of the way we are. You may not get some help from a local agency. If not, you're free to turn around and call us. There's hotlines out here for us, 1-800-TBI-FIND. We'll get somebody on the phone for you. Again, if you're around Nashville, you're used to dealing with a very visible police department, a very dedicated police department. But if you're out in one of the far reaches counties out here, the sheriff's department may close down at midnight. We're there, and we'll be there. Yes, sir. I'm Dale.
Identity theft is a real problem.
Yes, sir.
And how should you handle something like that if you're getting stolen? I mean, should you investigate it yourself, as I'm being told that you should do, or should you simply report the case, leave it to, let's say, TBI?
I wouldn't just necessarily just report it and let it die. I would go on and report the Secret Service. I believe they're the ones that's doing most of the identity theft investigations now because of the financial part of it. That would be my first phone call, but I wouldn't let it die. Any others? Thank you all. Enjoy your lunch.
city's and our county's chief law enforcement officer and one of my colleagues, Chief Steve Anderson. It's a pleasure for you to be here with us today, and I so appreciate you taking this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly my privilege to be here today, and thank you to the Human Relations Commission for putting this forum together. This is time well spent today. Hate crimes, whether they be local or whether they be federal prosecuted, are taken very seriously by our department. Our Specialized Investigations Division reviews every report that comes through our department that has the possibility of a hate crime prosecution, to categorize it, properly report it, and make sure that it's referred for prosecution. Detective Mike Dixon is here today. He's the tall one. He'll be speaking to you a little bit later about his firsthand experience. Here in Nashville, we're very fortunate to have Jerry Martin as the United States Attorney for the Middle District of Tennessee. Anytime there's a change in office, in the prosecutor's office, the United States Attorney's office, you're somewhat apprehensive because you're familiar with who is there and you don't know exactly who's coming on board. But this transition has been seamless. Jerry has taken over. He's created a partnership with us. We're very proud to work with him on a day-to-day basis. I know that I can call Jerry at any time. He's going to take my call. He's going to take it serious, and he's going to be our partner. Dave Rivera, one of his chief assistants, is here with us. Thank you, David. Jerry was born in Middle Tennessee, Bell Buckle, and his bio says it's near Shelbyville. I believe that Bell Buckle is probably more famous than Shelbyville at this time. Jerry attended Dartmouth College, Stanford Law School in California. Again, we're very proud to have him as our United States Attorney, my friend and our partner, Jerry Martin.
Thank you, Chief Anderson. I really appreciate it. It's a privilege to be the U.S. Attorney with you at the helm of the Metro Police Department. We have a great working relationship, and it says a lot about your leadership, and I appreciate that. I also want to thank the Metro Human Relations Commission for giving me the opportunity to speak and participate in this forum. Shortly after being appointed by the President as the United States Attorney, I had the pleasure of meeting with the President at the White House with some of my colleagues from around the country. President Obama told us that we should not see ourselves as his U.S. attorneys. Instead, he told us that we were the people's attorneys. We were not, according to President Obama, merely a local extension of the Department of Justice, but rather advocates for the citizenry in our respective districts. I can think of no better way to carry out this mandate than rigorous enforcement of the civil rights laws. America is the greatest nation in the world because we, a nation of immigrants, have historically embraced our differences and even exploited them. It hasn't always been easy, and our past is surely not perfect. But today's forum is the embodiment of the idea that government should work to promote equality and justice. This administration is completely committed to the enforcement of our hate crime statutes and other civil rights laws. We will not sit idly by and allow any of our citizens to live in fear because of who they are. We will use every tool in our arsenal as federal prosecutors to seek justice and hold those accountable who violate the law. If you use violence to divide our community by targeting someone based on their race, ethnicity, gender, religion, sexual orientation, or disability, we will come after you. You will be prosecuted to the fullest extent allowed under the law, and you will face lengthy jail sentences in the federal system with no parole. The Justice Department's Civil Rights Division is, as its leader Tom Perez says, open for business. But this commitment extends beyond Washington, D.C. U.S. attorneys' offices across the country are at the forefront of civil rights enforcement. Our efforts include a wide gamut of matters across the country, including challenging state voter identification laws, to enforcing the Americans with Disabilities Act, to ensuring that our soldiers who return from deployment are not discriminated against by their employers. Close to home, the department recently announced a settlement with Bank of America and Countrywide in excess of $300 million for discriminatory lending practices. Hundreds of victims here in the Middle District of Tennessee suffered as a result of these racially discriminatory practices and will benefit from the settlement. All of these efforts are of utmost importance, but none are more important than a commitment to enforce the federal hate crime statutes. The enactment in 2009 of the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act goes a long way to giving federal and local law enforcement the tools they need to prosecute these cases. The law makes it easier to prosecute hate crimes by removing unnecessary jurisdictional obstacles that often made it impossible to bring these cases. The law also empowers us, for the first time, to prosecute hate crimes committed because of a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. Sadly, it didn't take long before the department had to use this new law. The very first case indicted under the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act involves a young man in New Mexico with a mental disability whose body was defaced and branded with symbols of hate due to the fact that he was a Native American. Without this hate crimes legislation, bringing this case and others like it would have been much more difficult, if not impossible. Anyone who says that there is not a need for these laws and their rigorous enforcement is simply ignoring the facts of what can and does happen to victims based on their identity. We here at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Nashville have also stepped up our civil rights enforcement efforts in order to send the clear message to the community that these violations will not be tolerated. We recently concluded a prosecution of 3 individuals who, as you may recall, defaced with swastikas and burned a mosque in Murray County to the ground. This hateful act was committed by these individuals in order to curry favor with hate groups. I have met with the leadership of that mosque, some of whom are here today, on multiple occasions, and you won't find citizens who are more respectful and proud of our Constitution and democratic form of government. Despite this terrible event, their commitment to this country and love of our fundamental values is deep and has not been shaken. These victims are not consumed with bitterness or anger. Instead, they praise the efficient and effective response by law enforcement and have taken comfort in the warm embrace by their fellow citizens in Murray County, who made it clear that the acts of these 3 individuals, all of whom are serving long federal prison sentences, are not representative of the community. We owe it to them, these faithful citizens, to ensure that justice is done. Unfortunately, in some corners, there continues to be misunderstanding and distrust of our Muslim citizens, who in many instances have lived in Middle Tennessee their entire lives and simply want to participate in the American dream. Last year, our office weighed in on the controversy surrounding the construction of the mosque in Rutherford County. Due to a highly publicized court challenge to the construction, Rutherford County found itself in the national spotlight. During these court proceedings, our office became aware of the fact that the plaintiffs were putting on evidence that Islam was not a recognized religion by the federal government for purposes of the First Amendment. Right around this same time, some of the equipment at the construction site was set on fire in the middle of the night by an arsonist who still remains at large. As we followed these events, and as the rhetoric in the court proceedings continued to ratchet it up, we prevailed on Attorney General Holder to allow us to file an amicus brief, also known as a friend of the court brief, to set the record straight about the federal government's position on whether Islam was indeed a recognized religion. The response to the filing was mixed. However, after meeting with some of the congregation of this mosque, we realized how important our intervention was. The Muslim community in Rutherford County, some of whom had lived there for 30 years, finally felt that someone in government was acknowledging that they too enjoyed the fundamental rights of worship and assembly that are enshrined in the First Amendment to the Constitution. This simple act reminded them of the core values upon which this country was founded and instilled confidence in them that at the end of the day, justice and common sense would prevail. But amicus briefs and lofty ideas aren't enough. We live in a world in which some refuse, through their actions, to acknowledge the worth and dignity of every human life. Currently, our office is prosecuting 30 gang members that were engaged in trafficking young girls, some as young as 12 years old, into this district for prostitution. Human trafficking has reached epidemic proportions, and the victims, often young children or immigrants, are almost always the most vulnerable in our society. These crimes will not be tolerated. The department has also stepped up efforts to eliminate school bullying. No child should be afraid to go to school because of his or her sexual orientation, race, disability, or religion. School districts who turn a blind eye to bullying or do not take measures to ensure that all students are provided an opportunity to learn in a safe environment will be hearing from us. Despite all of these efforts, we can still do more. Too many of our citizens remain the targets of bullying, threats, and violence based upon their race, religion, ethnicity, gender, or sexual orientation. My message to you today is simple. If you are the victim of a hate crime or other civil rights violation, then report it to us or our FBI partners or the local authorities. Speak up and engage us. We will respond. Recently, the Department of Homeland Security announced a campaign called If You See Something, Say Something. The premise being that the first line of defense against terrorist threats is our citizenry. As the case of the Times Square bomber demonstrates, an observant hot dog vendor can make the difference in thwarting a disaster. That principle can be extended, though, beyond counterterrorism. For the law enforcement and advocacy groups in attendance today, let me encourage you to speak up and report instances of possible civil rights violations and hate crimes in particular. Simply put, if you see something, say something. My office, as well as the FBI, are available as a resource to you for training and dialogue. Rigorous enforcement of the civil rights laws cannot be realized without someone on the ground identifying potential violations and responding accordingly. This must be a collective effort. No agency, group, or individual can accomplish this unilaterally. A week and a half ago, the nation celebrated the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King famously said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." I find these words both inspiring and comforting. I remind the attorneys and staff of the U.S. Attorney's Office that we are privileged to have jobs whose sole mandate is to seek justice on behalf of the citizens of our district. It is our hope that we, in a small but important way, get to help to bend that arc in the right direction. It's been a privilege to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
If you see something, say something. Thank you so much for that. Right now, we're going to bring you one other departmental partner in today's forum, and I am most privileged to introduce my friend Walter Atkinson. Walter came and visited me about a month and a half after I started with the Metro Human Relations Commission last spring, and we've been in regular contact ever since. It was around that time that I told him that I was open for business as well, and that we would do anything that we possibly could to reinforce the Commission's mission, which is in fact to promote health, safety, peace, and the general welfare of the population of Davidson County. Walter and I started talking back then about what we might be able to do together, and part of that is this culmination of this event today. So Walter Atkinson is a senior conciliation specialist with the Community Relations Service of the U.S. Department of Justice. And he works in Atlanta and travels around to communities that have been experiencing some form of stress or conflict around civil rights issues, and he's one of the first people on the ground to help out in a community. He is our partner, he is our friend, and Walter, please come to the podium. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Many of you heard from the U.S. Attorney's Office, you've heard from the FBI, you heard from the police chief, and you heard from other partners that come together to address hate crime. And while you may not know about our agency, the Community Relations Service of the U.S. Department of Justice. The agency of itself, during the time that the Hate Crime Prevention Act was being organized and finalized and going through Congress, our agency has been one of the partners at the table. In the act itself, you read the act, the Community Relations Service Department is mentioned specifically and our role. I'm here this afternoon to tell you about what do we do as an agency and what our role is in addressing bias, hate crimes based on actual or perceived. And so what I want you to look at, from Region 4, our agency has jurisdiction over 8 states, known as the Southeast region. Those states that you see marked off to your right is Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Mississippi, and Kentucky. Yours truly have the assignment of the states of Tennessee, South Carolina, Mississippi, and Kentucky. In our office, we have a large staff of 3 people, and which one of them work in our field office in Miami, Florida. So we do the best that we can, and we have many ears and eyes out there that keep us abreast of what's going on around the country, as well as our headquarters in Washington, D.C. Before you is an organization chart of the Department of Justice. And on the chart, you see down in the Civil Rights Division is our agency, the Community Relations Service. And our director reports to the Assistant Attorney General, Mr. Perez, and the U.S. Attorney General. So that's where you get a chance on this chart, you see where we fit in. Our agency has been in existence since 1964, the signing of the Civil Rights Act. And we were established under Title 10 of that act. The original act, when it was established and Congress passed it, approved it, and it was signed off by President Johnson, Lyndon B. Johnson at the time, basically said our agency was given a mandate to address community conflict based on the perception of discrimination because of one's race, color, or national origin. With that, we were also given the authority by Congress to intervene on our own volition. We monitor media lines, we get contacted by community organizations, grassroots organizations, police departments, school districts, and other entities who are aware of our services and ask for assistance. The Matthew Shepard and Jamesburg Jr. Hate Crime Act added the other protected classes as you see there. And you've been hearing about that all day, so I'm not going to go into that. But those was added to our jurisdiction, and we work with communities to address issues that basically derive out of some type of conflict that occurs, such as the recent one in Smith County. I was presenting at a bullying workshop at Tennessee Tech University this past weekend. Some of you may have heard of it. After I completed my presentation around our role addressing bullying issues in the schools, a couple of parents came up to me and said, we just had a suicide, an elementary student committed suicide because he could no longer take the bullying in school, and the bullying was based on his sexual or actual perceived perception of sexual orientation. And the parent asked me, he said he felt very sad about it because he said, what could I have done to prevent this to happen? And this wasn't the parent of the student, but just a parent in the community. Wanted to know, could I have done more? And he held his head down. And what was startling was that it was alleged that the student tried to get help, but no one gave the attention to it. So we lose a young life. I guess I take it hard because as a former teacher, I taught middle school and high school, and also had a student in my classroom who committed suicide. And, any teacher take that pretty seriously and hard, just as much as the parent would. I'm not going to cover this too much, but you pretty much know, you've seen this mostly all day today, Matthew Shepard and Jamesburg Jr., and it's basically what the Hate Crime Prevention Act is pretty much what the emphasis, and so I'm not going to go into that too much. So, who is the Community Relations Service and what do? We provide our services by doing conciliation, mediation, providing technical assistance, training. We try to get parties to sit down and communicate and dialogue. Let's see, can we work through whatever differences that there may be. So that's pretty much who we are. Our mandate, we are an impartial agency. We don't set blame. We try to look at the conflict from both sides and try to identify all the parties involved, to hear what they have to say, and get them to agree, let's work together to resolve wherever the issue or conflict is. We also sworn in confidentiality. We do not disclose our work. We do not talk to the media. All right? At least we do not in the field. But our office in Washington, we have a media person that does all the communication. But we do not disclose what we're doing unless the parties involved give us permission to disclose that information, and only then would they agree for us to disclose. In regards to mediation, here's a picture of a mediation process that was taking place in a small town in South Carolina that I facilitated. This mediation took a little over a year to complete. And you say, why such a long time? You just don't go in, get parties to sit down at the table and rush them through. So one of the reasons, because within the group, the community has their representation, and the police department, the city mayor, the mayor and the city manager identified their team. Now, what was so unique about this mediation process, the community as a whole, this particular mediation was involved racial profiling by law enforcement officers in this town. But before the mediation team was identified, the community leaders of the black community hosted a forum. Over 200 people came. And there they did a couple things. One, they identified what was the important issues to them as it relates to police. And second, what was the top priority issues they wanted to have addressed. And then they selected the team that would represent them. All right. Once they identified and the mayor put together his team, we went forth. And within the mediation process, what also happened, they discovered before we can make a decision on agreeing on solutions, we need to do some more research. So they divided up in teams, right, and went out and did additional research, all right, in regards to how much was costing. We did say standardization. We standardized the criteria of our office on how much would that cost us in time and dollars and so on. They did all the research together. They came back, they reported out, they said, yes, we can go with this or we can't go with it. So that's one of the reasons why the mediation took some time, because they did research. So when it was all done, they all agreed we had a lot in common that we had against each other. And they signed off to an agreement. This picture shows the actual signing of the agreement. This is another operation that we do to help communities. When there's demonstrations or protests, we work with all the parties, including law enforcement. We work along the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, they are involved as well, to make sure that if such a protest and demonstration is going to occur, that it's done peacefully. That hopefully that the event can end without anyone getting hurt. Hopefully very, very few, if not none, arrests. And that's what we do. Although I'm based in Region 4, I was also was asked to join the team in Jena, Louisiana for this particular demonstration protest. And you see, there are some national leaders that was up front, and you'd be surprised a lot of the issues we had to deal with. Those people in the yellow, and there was others that are members of the SCLC and WCP, we trained the marshals. Starting sometime 5 o'clock in the morning, we identified who they were, and then we had a joint training, gave them marshal training. Yes, so that means 5 o'clock in the morning. They started arriving at 4 in the morning. And so we was on site to do that. This is a rally in a small town of Georgia where the police force was very, very small. A chief, maybe 2 officers. All right? But the Klan had decided to have a rally there, and that was in February 2010, and this was kind of new to them. And what you see there is, on the left side, a wizard is, speaking out, and then to the right, you saw members of the Klan up front, and then you see a lot of people just all intermingling together. That's really not the right way to have that. But they didn't know. But we worked not only with the law enforcement, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, also with there was some FBI people, local sheriff departments, and so on, that to help provide security, and also monitor for any outside groups that come in and try to create problems. Now, what some of you may not know, in this type of situation, because we met with the Klan members, we sat down and we met with the leader of the Klan for that particular area, and he was very out front to say, we want this to be peaceful. We don't want any problems. And yes, as Mr. Shepard said earlier, the law is the law, regardless who they are, what their positions, what their values are. We have to protect everyone's First Amendment rights. So just as much we talk to help and try to protect rights of those that are not protesters, but all those that are protesters as well. So we meet with the Klan. The problem we found was that on your right-hand side, and you probably see this in a moment with another picture, the wizard for that local area was very accommodating and really wanted to encourage peace. He didn't want any hateful language at all. The gentleman you see in the brown was completely opposite. He brought a group down to join this particular rally, from Alabama, and was very, very vocal and used a lot of threatening, intimidating language that really heightened some tension among the people there that you saw right on the right, they see on the right-hand side. So we had to work through that. We got through it very peacefully. On top of that, we also got word, this is another thing that we do, working through our intelligence and people on the ground, our contacts, that the new Black Panther Party was coming to town, and they was a threat as well. So we had to deal with that as well. Technical assistance, as I've talked to you about the rallies, this happened to be a rally that was done up really in Knoxville, Tennessee. And we worked with the local police department, the FBI, and all the key people there, TBI, and so on, and providing technical assistance in regards to regards to best practices that we have known working with these agencies, but we don't tell law enforcement what to do. We work in partnerships. If they ask us, what have you guys done has been used as best practices, and we share that with them. We have to develop contingency plans as well as operation plans, and we carry them out. And the chief there did an excellent job, I thought, because he was the lead person. The chief of the Knoxville Police Department did an excellent job in the way they handled this particular rally. Another event that took place, this took place in Chattanooga, Tennessee, As you can see, again, another issue of concerns about racial profiling. What you have there in the left, I was facilitating a discussion there, and along with the site for the FBI, Mr. Lambert, Richard Lambert, and also to his left or right was the U.S. attorney for that Eastern District, was also there, and they also took part in the workshop. We had breakout sessions, and they presented at the breakout sessions. We had about 200-300 people that came out to this particular event that took place. So facilitating forums and workshops is what we do. That's part of the things we do to help, again, to educate and get the community and organizations to work together. But it's not just enough to bring people together and talk. We want to do some type of capacity building and empowerment, because once I leave, go back to Atlanta, you live here, right? So instead of to continue to come back at every incident, try to help the community pull together strategies and do capacity building to address these type of situations on their own by working with city officials, law enforcement, your own law enforcement, school district personnel, and so on to make this happen. And if you want the involvement of the U.S. Attorney Office, our office, we make ourselves available as well. This is another event, not another event, but another program we provide is known as the Arabs, Muslims, Sikh Cultural Awareness and Protocol Seminar. We was asked to develop this particular seminar after 9/11, and have been used throughout the country ever since. And another one of our most requested seminars. We don't present it. We help local communities pull it together. However, we do bring in Arab and Muslim speakers and Sikh speakers or consultants to actually to present. The most recent one we had was in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, that pretty much stemmed from the building of the mosque there. But what the parents, leadership of the Muslim community there wanted was opportunity for the school district officials to get educated about the culture and protocol of Arabs and Muslims. Why? Because their children was been harassed, allegedly was harassed and intimidated and threatened in the aftermath of the mosque, building the mosque situation there. That came about with the assistance of the U.S. Attorney Office, Jerry Martin, Blanche, you heard earlier, FBI, you heard some of the FBI people here, and some of the other law enforcement people that came and took part in this particular workshop with school counselors, principals, vice principals, and educators sat in, and student resource officers took part in that. We must have had almost 200 people that came to that particular event that represented both the Rutherford County School District and the Murfreesboro School District. And it was time to be very, very successful. Again, that's another picture of that same rally I was telling you about, and the gentleman that was at the podium there was the one that basically was the leader for that particular area of the Ku Klux Klan. He was the wizard, and he was the one that really wanted to make sure that everything went smoothly with that particular rally. And he got in conflict with the other gentleman I was telling you about because he had another agenda. The gentleman, the wizard that came from Alabama. So those are the type of things that we do to try to help these events be successful. I don't think I'm going to say about the Jasper, Texas case. We was brought in not too long right after the incident occurred, because the tension in Jasper, Texas had gotten so heightened that anything could have happened. The black community, the white community, we were brought on to try to help reduce that tension and get the people to work, the communities to work together. On top of that, we also got whipped that the new members of the new Black Panther Party was coming in, and they was bringing weapons as well. It's a lot of tense moments. And those that work from the FBI and from the, and I'm pretty sure Mr. Shepard's, not Mr. Shepard, but the FBI that was here can talk about this particular case because they can realize and they know how tense that situation was. And we work with the community to help to reduce those tensions, and we still have people there now, right? So this is another case that we have worked on. This had to be in Powhatan, West Virginia. I'm not going to go in too much, but the idea here to show you that the type of cases that we have done, how we work with communities to address those situations, and bullying. There's no doubt that the problem of bullying has increased, and as Jared mentioned earlier, that it's not going to be tolerated, and that we're going to work aggressively to address the problem. And we have worked with law enforcement. We got together with the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights, and other federal agencies to come up with some best practices and resources that schools can use to address bullying. Out front in the lobby, I guess on one of those tables, I brought some packets with resources that you can tap into. All right, the list resources and also additional information about our agency and what we do as well. But that resource packet, some of you may want to pick up and take with you that you can share with others, either in your schools or communities, and so on. As I mentioned before, I was just in Cookeville, Tennessee, presenting specifically work that we do to address bullying in the schools and the communities. This particular graphic I thought was very impelling because if you look at the age brackets or grade brackets, take a look that middle school students are very, very vulnerable. Yes, high school, but look what happens in the middle schools. And so we have to do something to address. And that can have to be sometimes some hard love. Hard love. At the end, here's my, again, my information in regards to agency, phone number. You can also, our website, you can tap into the website, and also there is my email address. If you have any questions, or if there's any way that you think that we can help you, assist you, feel free to contact. I see a hand up. Yes, sir.
Very quick question.
Yeah.
Because I've heard what you said, but I'm not sure exactly how one citizen interested in doing something goes about. A weird hypothetical. I'm very disturbed about, this would be crazy, some Republican candidates running, and they're running national ads, and they're clearly anti-homosexual. Let's say, for instance, Rick Perry, Santorum, or Bob. I mean, that's crazy hypothetical. But as hateful as that could be, and it's actually run on national television, and I want to get a big rally going, do I go see you first?
No, I won't be the first one. No, I won't be the first one you go see. If you go to do a rally, have a rally, I think the first thing you probably want to do is talk to the local police department. Why? I think they have the jurisdiction, and the chief can correct me on this, or lieutenant, you can correct me on this, have the jurisdiction to give you permit to rally, because you have to let them know when you're going to have it, where, and they have to give you permits, right? So they have to do that because there's a lot of things that they have to do in regards to, once giving you approval, dealing with security, traffic, and all this sort of thing. So that's one of the things. The next thing you want to do, then say, okay, contact our office, say we're having this rally, and we may need some assistance. We may need to train some of our volunteers on what to look for, how to be a marshal, and those type of things. And we work with you in regards to that. All right. So those are the things that we can do. But I'd be glad to talk to you further after this, or you give me your contact number, we can contact each other.
In a way, I was just asking, does that disturb you at all that we have they're gone, I think, in this maybe San Juan Sunday. We have folks running for president that are openly anti-gay, that are openly hateful, and yet we have a hate crime that the federal government is supposed to be implementing and working on. I was hoping the attorney hadn't left yet, but does that disturb you?
Well, I can, but Blanche is here. She's from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Go ahead, Blanche.
The issue that you raised is, you're talking about a conflict of the First Amendment right to freedom or other constitutional rights or other rights that are the bottom line is there is a First Amendment right to speak. And there is a First Amendment right recognized by the Constitution and also the Supreme Court that happens on that. But the decision I made earlier is the federal criminal laws don't regulate your ability to express your political opinion. But to the extent that that leads to some sort of action, that is a crime of conduct. So the distinction in drawing here is thought speech versus biased speech that leads to actual harm. Now, that's not to say that these acts are harmful, but the unfortunate truth is there is a personal right to voice these political views, and I'm sure that I don't understand that.
Well, I'm saying that because it concerned you as a the federal folks that are in this federal law. We've got presidential candidates that are coming in and saying hateful things. They're talking about the very things that are supposed to be addressed by this federal law, and yet they're running for president. Does that concern the current administration that's going to be in charge of when the law gets repealed?
What I can do is speak to these private citizens I can speak to as a federal prosecutor as much as I can. The distinction here is one between the First Amendment right and the ability to actually respond. As a private citizen, yes, I can.
I want to thank Walter for your presentation. Thank you very much. We are pushing into our panelists' time, and so I want to make sure that we respect the panelists who have come in for this time. Walter, thank you so much, and it's wonderful to know that you're here. At this particular time, I'd like to do two things. First, to just preview for you the rest of the day. We have a panel of community leaders who have come together this afternoon to share with us a little bit more personally about what this issue looks like on the ground. And then we're going to have an opportunity for the participants who are here to share information with all of the officials who are here. And so one of our commissioners, Deb Palmer-George, will facilitate a small group conversation activity after the panel happens. And we'll have other time for question and answers at that time too. I'd like to ask the panelists to just come up to the table sitting here, and I will go through their names and a short introduction of each one of them who is coming up. The first person who is coming up, it looks like, is Daoud Aboudiad. And Daoud is he is president, as a matter of fact, and you all can sit right here at the table. Daoud is president of the Islamic Center of Colombia, and you've heard and seen what happened to that mosque in Colombia today, and so Daoud will speak to us about that. Sitting next to Daoud is Chris Sanders, and Chris Sanders is the president of the Nashville Committee of the Tennessee Equality Project, and we're grateful for your presence here. Hetty Weinberg, who is the executive director of the Tennessee ACLU, protecting, Hetty, I thought about what Walter was saying with the Klan on one side and the community on the other side, protecting our rights on both ends of the equation, and we're grateful for your presence. Next to Hetty is Jonathan Orr, who is the program manager for school safety with Metro Public Schools. And at the forum today, I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome all of the Metro school personnel who are here with us today. We have school social workers as well as family involvement specialists here, and I thank you all for being here. Next to Jonathan is one of my new buds, Detective Mike Dixon. And Mike Dixon is the officer who is assigned under Chief Anderson to investigate hate crime in Metro Davidson County. And finally, next to him, a longtime friend, is Roger Dinwiddie. Roger is the executive director, actually it's the CEO of STARS Nashville. And those of you who are educators in and around the state know that STARS work, students taking a right stand, work with students in our schools all the time on social emotional learning, conflict resolution management. Roger is an Alveus bully prevention trainer, the absolute best bully prevention training in the world. So I thank all of you, and each of them will have some remarks, and there'll be time for the audience to have questions. Thank you so much. And anyone can begin. So you should all be on, but is that good on?
Yes, that's working. Okay. I thought I was being silenced there. I work with an organization that works primarily on gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender issues. And I want to talk a little bit about the context in Middle Tennessee. And I think this will tell you a lot. This is my favorite sign to see when I'm driving. I don't know whether you can see it, but it says Music City, Metropolitan Nashville, Davidson County, home of the Grand Ole Opry. And I'm going to tell you why that's my favorite sign to see. Because the metropolitan government of Nashville and Davidson County, unfortunately, is the only one in Middle Tennessee where I'm assured that if something happens to me, the governmental officials that I'm dealing with will make a reasonable effort of treating me fairly. Our metropolitan government has worked very hard, I think, at having an intentional conversation about sexual orientation and gender identity since 2009, and we've seen a number of fruits come from that. I think it's been a far more welcoming environment in the last few years than at any other time, and compared to any other government in Middle Tennessee. Let me run down some incidents that will give you a sense of what it's like to be gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender in Middle Tennessee outside Metro Nashville. The sponsors of a bill that took away our 2011 Metro Non-Discrimination Ordinance came from Williamson County and Wilson County. Jacob Rogers, a gay man in Cheatham County, took his life after being bullied at school. Rolling Hills Hospital in Franklin denied a lesbian couple partner visitation until it was brought to their attention that they couldn't do that because of Health and Human Services regulations. A gay male rape victim was demeaned by the Franklin Police Department when he reported the crime. He was told something to the effect of, "Well, isn't that what you all like?" Philip Parker, a gay teen in Smith County, took his life after being bullied just recently. All of these incidents have taken place in the last 3 months, apart from the legislation that I referenced. On top of all that, we've got this statewide layer of dealing with all this anti-equality legislation. Now, these events are not hate crimes in and of themselves, but they do set, I think, a climate of fear for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people in Middle Tennessee. Again, we have a very good situation, I think, in Metro Nashville, but once you cross the border, it's really hit or miss in terms of whom you're dealing with. In terms of the hate crime statistics last year that the TBI collected, there were hate crimes based on sexual orientation in Murfreesboro, Dixon, Manchester, Greenbrier, Hendersonville, and Metro Nashville. So we're certainly not immune, but this whole area has seen a number of hate crimes. So that just sets the context, and maybe we can talk about more of that later. Thank you. Absolutely.
Sorry. My name is Dawood Alou-Diab, and I'm with the Islamic Center in Columbia, Tennessee. I'm not a law enforcement agent. I'm not an expert about hate crime, but as a victim of hate crime, I'm going to make comments about two personal stories. One is about the burning of the Islamic Center, which you've heard about, and I'm not going to go into much more detail. The other one is about my own children, my son and daughter being in school and experiencing bullying for being Muslim. In both instances, I think it's what I'd like to share with you is, and I'm able to talk about those even though there's risk in talking about them, because I know that there is commitment at the local, state, and federal level for my civil rights. So I'm empowered to talk about them, and I believe it's important to talk about those stories. The first comment is that I believe that our trouble in Columbia did not start on February 9, 2008. Our trouble began with a subculture, I think, that exists in our community. And as you have mentioned, my answer to you is yes, I am very concerned about some of the comments that are made on by politicians and leaders, both on the local and the state level. But this subculture of hate, I think is all about reducing individuals and humans to a single issue item. And I loved what Mr. Shepard has said. Matt was his son, not his gay son. My wife is Mr. Joe Glover's daughter, not Mr. Joe Glover's Muslim daughter. And it's important to keep that because I think it's systematic. First, you make a human being a single issue label, and then there's a process of demonizing. It becomes easy to target those individuals with hate speech, which kind of sets the tone and makes it easier for those individuals who live and breathe that culture and are encouraged by others, unfortunately, to actually cross the line into committing an act of hate, a criminal act, as they did with our mosque. With my son, his first experience into a public school was that when we complained to the principal's office, 22 students were called into the principal's office for calling him a terrorist and saying that they would cut his head off before he would get a chance to kill him because he's a terrorist. So my first call to action is, as a citizen, which I know law enforcement agents are limited in what they can do, as a citizen, I would say, let's recognize what hate speech is, and we have a voice, and we can speak against hate speech. So that would be an answer to what you said earlier. The second thing is, in talking about my story, I've learned the impact of hate crime. And at the time, as Mr. Walter has indicated, he was available at the time, and he said, we have resources, we have, the U.S. Department of Justice can do certain things to help you out. I didn't understand what we were going through, and I think as leaders of minority communities and as people who have those resources available for hate crime victims, it's important to understand we're not on the same page. Yes, my wife had horrible dreams, and she would wake up in the middle of the night having a dream about someone removing her headscarf and pulling her hair in public. Yes, I didn't sleep. I still can't sleep well at night. I have to set my alarm at my house, and every time I do, I think about somebody throwing something through the window. The stress, the withdrawal, the reevaluation of your relationship with the community, your family, your friends. Why didn't people come and say, sorry about this? Is it because they don't care? What about my family who's Christian? My grandkids, their grandfather is a Methodist preacher. How does he feel about that? So it is important, I think, for us to understand that, for the leaders to make sure those resources are available, to recognize the impact, and for people with the resources to really be persistent. I wish 5 years later, 4 to 5 years later, that I used those resources for myself, for my children, and for my community. The third point that I'd like to make is that after 4 years, my daughter was able to speak about this incident. And she did it in a 5-minute video. I wish I could show you the video because I think it's very telling, but in one slide she says, an act of kindness can change the course of a life. And that's so very true, because the act of hatred that was committed against us, that my kids experienced in school, it has the potential of changing our lives. In so many ways it has. My call to you is to realize that your act of kindness towards people who are victimized by hate crime can have an equal impact. And we have a voice as private citizens, as individuals, and we should take it very seriously and exercise that privilege, as U.S. Attorney's Office mentioned. I mean, I've always thought of myself as an American, but now I'm an American who's going to speak up, not just for myself, but for everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, is that on? Okay, let you have one. Thank you. Hello, is it on? Yeah.
I think he just turned it off.
Hello. Yeah? Okay. Hello, thank you. I'm Hetty Weinberg, and in some ways, I guess I'm fortunate to have been doing the work I've been doing for the last 25 years, and I'm feeling like we are moving forward. It does get better. And I've seen the types of assaults that were described this morning and the types of hate crimes we're hearing about on the panel today across the state. Yes, Davidson County in some ways is an island, but we are surrounded by a ring of counties where there are very few protections, and the same goes obviously from east to west Tennessee. The good news and the changes in this state over the last 20 years is that we have a much more responsive, professional, strong law enforcement system in this state. And it starts with the FBI, and in this city we're lucky to have Steve Anderson lead a police department where people understand that if you are a victim of hate, of a hate crime, that you have and will have a responsive police department, and you will have a TBI and an FBI who will investigate. And I will tell you, when we hear about assaults in other parts of the state where people are having trouble getting the district attorney to investigate, one of the things the ACLU does is actually intervene and make those phone calls and initiate that relationship so that the DA and others in their community recognize that they have to take these complaints seriously. The complaints are everything from gay couples' homes being vandalized to gay students and African American students and Latinos students being bullied and assaulted just outside the school and in the school. Certainly we know about the story of Matthew Shepard and James Byrd, and while we are fortunate that hasn't happened in our state, it is only because of the voices of the people to ensure that law enforcement stays strong. I think it's really important to recognize that
In our own state legislature, we're seeing an assault on not only our civil liberties, but on communities of color and on people who practice different faiths than the majority community. And it's important that, as Dennis Shepard said, our voices are heard in our legislature. Just in the last 2 years, there have been aggressive legislative initiatives to basically criminalize the practice of Islam, to take away the rights based on local counties, to expand religious institutions, mosques, and now we're dealing with an effort by some in the legislature to consider challenging comprehensive anti-bullying legislation by putting in certain legislation that would create more obstacles to getting the protection young people need while they're in the classroom. So these are stories that need to be told, and more important, your voices need to be heard in the state legislature and in your communities. There's nothing more powerful for a legislator, nothing more powerful for advocates to stand strong with the voices in the community. And so the fact that you're here is really so important. I want to just end with just a brief story. In the 80s, we were contacted by the Klan because they had been denied a permit in Pulaski, Tennessee. And I knew quite well when we were a one-person office there, so when I picked up the phone and said Hetty Weinberg, and the man introduced himself, I knew he had very little interest in talking to Ms. Weinberg, but he was going to talk because he knew ACLU would in fact protect his right to freedom of speech, though not condone his hateful speech. We had to go to court to get a permit given to the Klan, and it was very difficult for a lot of people to understand why the ACLU would support that kind of hateful speech. But as you've heard time and time again, one's speech is only as protected as the next person's speech. You can and we need to criminalize the act, the conduct, but not the speech. It's better to know about the speech. And so the moral to the story is the Klan marched, everyone in Pulaski stayed home, the community shut down the downtown area. And what happened weeks later were people who had never talked together before, the African American community, the white community, under the leadership of some elected officials and the chamber came together and stood very tall and created a united front to ensure that their speech and their voices were being heard, and that the hateful speech took, the back seat. And I think that's a lesson for all of us, that our voices need to be the voices out there that are being heard and that are persuading our elected officials to pass the kind of laws we need to protect vulnerable communities. So thank you.
Good afternoon. First, I would like to thank the Metro Human Relations Commission for the invitation to be able to share a little bit about this issue. From the standpoint of our public school system here in Davidson County. My responsibility, I'm in the Department of Student Services, and my role is to serve as a program manager for Tennessee Safe Schools. And so within that role, I'm responsible for providing initiatives and programs for our school district to address safety issues. And so some of those biggest issues right now, as you all can imagine, and I'm sure you hear about, are bullying and harassment and gang prevention and intervention. And so with that being said, in our school system, we don't have anything in our language as far as policies and procedures are concerned that pertains to hate crimes. But what we do address is assaults, fighting, sexual assault, aggravated assault, so on and so forth. And so throughout that investigation process and disciplinary process, if we find out that laws have been violated, state or federal laws, and then at that point the law enforcement is contacted and then they intervene. So for example, if we're investigating a case of bullying and it looks as though it could constitute a hate crime, and then at that point we get the law enforcement involved. And so with that being said, I've been in this position now for a little over a year. One of the first responsibilities I had was to join the bullying task force team last year, in which we looked at our current bullying and harassment policy and revised it. We revamped the whole thing, and so this was a little over a year ago. The board approved this last February, actually, so almost a year ago. And since then, we are under new leadership in our department. Mr. Tony Majors, who is the new assistant superintendent of student services. And so since he's taken office, he looked at it again and said we need to come back together because the language wasn't strong enough. And then there were some other things that we needed to address as far as the reporting procedures and investigating procedures, and also putting some things in place that protects those the individuals that do the reporting. And so right now where we are, we've been working, you hear from Mr. Dinwiddie, who is one of the experts on bullying and harassment in the state of Tennessee. He's joined us. We brought us some other leaders in the community to help us revise this policy and make sure that we're serving our students, and not only students, but our staff and everybody associated with MMPS to the best of our ability. And as far as the call to action, I would say awareness is key. Being aware of the policies, being aware of your rights as citizens, as parents who have students in the school system, being aware of the due process. And if your child is a victim of bullying and harassment, just making sure you're aware of the process that needs to take place to make sure that he or she gets the support that they need. And so that, and then the second thing, which is, I'm really not speaking on behalf of MMPS right now, this is my personal opinion, but this is saying that moral choice precedes intellectual orientation. And it sounds like a lot, but it's really not. It's just saying before we can get people to do right, or before we choose to behave right, we first have to believe that we should be behaving right. And so the biggest thing we're seeing in the school system, I'm seeing in the school system right now is stems from the community, but it's a lack of morality. And so the only way to help our young people develop those characteristics is to model it. And so that is my call to everybody here, including myself, to model what it looks like to be a citizen who cares for other citizens, a citizen who upholds the values of what this country was founded on. And so, thank you.
I'm Detective Mike Nixon, and my role in this, as a police department, if you don't call, we're not going to know. And I know that the people at this forum probably would call the police, but you need to go back and encourage the community that you're from. Is this ringing? All right. Encourage the people in the community that you're from. Again. So better. Oh no. I'll take all of them. Encourage the people that you work with every day, whether a religious organization, an advocate group, go back and talk to the people. If you want us, if it's in Davidson County, if you want to act on behalf, if you want to call us to your place, we spoke earlier. I've had to go to a person from Catholic Charities actually called us, and we went to that person's house, and it was a Muslim woman there, and she was scared to call the police because of repercussions in her own community. So go back and talk to those. But if you don't call the police, we do not know. If you're a witness, if you're living in the neighborhood and you think somebody's being victim of any crime, not just hate crime, call us. We'll come out. Ms. Blanche said earlier, if the victim does perceive it to be a hate crime, make sure that you do tell us. Box 15, which I get to look at on every report that comes in. If the victim doesn't tell us they perceive it as a hate crime, it's hard for us to know whether it's perceived as a hate crime by that victim. You can check yes, no, or unknown. I get every one of them that says yes or unknown. I get to read over those and determine, look at the facts of the case, talk to some victims. If we do have a suspect in the case, talk to the victim and try to get their perceived get their side of the story too. Just because it may look like on the outside that it may be a hate crime doesn't always mean that it is. It could be hate crime related, but it doesn't, their motivation, it has to do with their motivation. Call us, go back to your communities and tell them that the police department is in support of everybody here. We're going to support everybody in our community. That's our job. It's good for me to come to forums like this because I get to meet people that I haven't met before from the school board, from the Muslim community, from different types of communities that I can reach out to. People know that they're supposed to call police, but sometimes we don't know where to go. They call the police, and we don't know necessarily who we're supposed to speak to. So these forums are good for us, too. So I appreciate the Metro Human Relations Commission having something like this. And if y'all have any questions, feel free to email me. I don't have enough cards for you. You can call me anytime. I'll stay around and talk to y'all for the rest of the day. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Roger Dinwiddie. I'm the director at STARS. And one of the things that we do is address the issue of bullying through training and consultation with school systems and communities throughout the city, throughout the state, and also throughout the country. And I guess what I'd like to say is I don't know much bullying that in fact isn't hate speech, which seems to me to be a real core issue in the discussion that we're talking about. And I think I'd like to just say a couple of things about this and then a call, so to speak, to action for all of us around the issue. And number one, it is really important to know something that you alluded to. We've made a lot of progress, but we've still got a long way to go when it comes to addressing this issue. Because there's a great misunderstanding between what conflict, just teasing and conflict and, so to speak, rough and tumble conflict, if you will, between children and what bullying is. And I think there's an assumption, perhaps in the public's mindset, that everybody knows what bullying is, and nothing could be farther from the truth. Conflict is inevitable. I mean, just getting across the street in the rain over there was some sort of sense of conflict just to get here, to sit down. Anybody married in here? Conflict is inevitable every day. Bullying, on the other hand, has absolutely nothing to do with conflict. Conflict is a form of peer abuse, and it more closely resembles the crimes of domestic abuse and physical abuse and sexual abuse, because all of those are issues of an imbalance of power. And bullying is, in fact, that issue. It's an imbalance of power. When any group or individual uses that power to overcome, stress out, intimidate, inflict harm aggressively on a person, and they do it over and over and over again in a relationship in which that imbalance of power is present. I think we make an assumption that every educator, and I'm speaking only about my experience, which is education, that every educator somehow knows that magically, when in fact most educators have not been trained in best practices in bullying prevention. And I want to say one more piece about moving on before the definition to sort of a call, if I could. And that is, I think the Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Education in October 2010 issued probably the most important letter that's been issued in a good number of years, which was the Dear Colleague letter, with two subsequent follow-up letters in December and April of 2011 around the issue of what in fact is bullying and when does bullying trigger other statutes. And in fact, bullying is, technically speaking, not a legal term. It's a policy issue. But Title VI, Title IX, and discrimination on the basis of disability are legal issues. And I was stunned, and I remain stunned, and I am an educator. My wife is an educator, so when I say this, I speak very personally. In most of my training experiences, whether it's here or across the country, when asked the question by two administrators, and recently had the privilege of doing that with almost 100, and less than 6 principals had read the Dear Colleague letter To me, the issue is one of true education in the educational environment about what bullying is and when it takes it to another level. Because as you well said, you can't take a handle of hate crime if in fact you don't know it is. And I would contend that educators, again, I am one, my wife is one, don't understand the differences between bullying, Title VI, Title IX, and the issues of discrimination on the basis of disability. So I think that's a real core issue. The other thing that you alluded to in your presentation at the very end was statistics about bullying. And I think we need to realize that high schools, and remember, the worst grade in bullying actually across the country statistically is 4th grade. God help us in 4th grade. It's a tough year. And then it gets progressively ups and downs along the way. But when it gets to high school, one of the things that happens is kids don't bully physically anymore. They don't have to bully physically. And that goes to the whole point of what bullying really is, and it's that emotional form of psychological terror that happens when somebody feels intimidated and afraid. And in the cases that have been mentioned already, certainly in the case of Jacob and Philip, nothing could be worse than to have been gay, to have been bullied, and not feel like there was any place at all to really turn to for deep support. It's horrendous. It's devastating. So I think the important piece to realize out of data is that in every school, and it's certainly been true in our research and through the largest database in the world, the Alveus survey database, that when asked the question on the survey, what do you feel when you see somebody being bullied? The answer from kids is almost 80% say, I feel sorry or a bit sorry and want to help. The problem is not that they feel that way. The problem is, does anybody act on the feelings? And to me, my call to action is this. In a no-snitch culture in which we live, the number one contributing factor to the success of addressing bullying is immobilizing and empowering the witnesses and bystanders to bullying, because they represent the largest group of people in any population. If we can mobilize that crowd, particularly students, to step forward and address the issue of bullying, we can re-norm an environment using those best practices to address the issue. And I think that's really my call, is can we in fact mobilize those kids who hate it and don't want to be a part of it?
Pluck the magic twanger, Froggy.
Hello? We're good. My name is Walter Searcy. I'm the state chairperson of the Tennessee Conference's branches of the NAACP Legal Redress Committee. I also serve in the same function in the Nashville branch of the NAACP. Let me ask a couple of questions since I've gotten here at the tail end of this. How many legislators are there here today? I heard that reference made. Do we have any that are still here? How many persons who are in law enforcement? Okay. In chief, 5, 6. How many from the Justice Department? How many are from NGOs, non-governmental organizations whose principal focus is the subject today? All right. How many pastors, priests, rabbis, imams are here today? How many persons are here principally because they've been victimized by hate, or someone in their family or close friend or relative has been so victimized? In 1909, the NAACP was founded, among other things, principally to address the crime of lynching. And it appears to many of us, I may have, yeah, let's see. Beep, beep.
Beep, beep.
Try to switch that around.
Are we good? Yeah. Okay. It appears to many of us that bullying in all of its manifestations, whether it's against gays, whether it's against religious minorities, whether it's against ethnic minorities, whether it's against whether it's gender-based, is nothing but a manifestation of lynching. And we should be as repugnant as the term lynching is to all of us. Bullying in all of its forms should be so repugnant. And if in fact we can demonize it such, and I suggest that's not a tactic that always has merit. But there are probably some things that are worthy of being demonized. And clearly, the manifestations of bullying, if anything merits such, then those things do so merit that approach. We have to make it uncool to be a bully. We have to make it not the popular thing, because most bullying does not happen in the abstract. It's not a one-on-one kind of thing. It's a group thing, you know, and I'm trying to demonstrate to my peoples, to my crew, you know, to my associates, how tough I am and how we should apply our advantage against these persons who obviously are not as tough and therefore merit this kind of treatment. And it's, you know, obviously it's difficult because we can't be at the kitchen table when these attitudes are developed. We can't be in the locker room. In all cases, we can't be on the playground. We can't be, you know, in the tavern. Wherever these things manifest themselves, but what we can do is attempt to make it as uncomfortable to be a bully as it is for the bullies to attempt to make it uncomfortable for their victims. Which suggests then that it must become a more prominent theme of our community agenda. There are a whole myriad of things that occur on a day-to-day basis that for those of us who have not been victimized easily find it just, you know, not something that we're going to spend a lot of time addressing. But for those persons who are subject to this, and not just once or twice in their lives, I think all of us have been so victimized once or twice in our lives at some point in our childhood, you know, and heaven forbid, maybe one or two of us were even bullies ourselves, but we're able to break away from whatever those traditions are, and it did not become a pattern and practice of our lives. But I'm talking about people who really are subject to terror on a regular and consistent basis. And there are some of us, I'm certain, in this room who experience this thing on a repetitive basis. For those persons, it is not just a casual experience, it's something that they experience on a routine basis. And that interferes with my quality of life, because
that's a deficiency then in the fabric of the American experience such that it's as intolerable for me as it is for them, because we could be spending our times enriching one another in ways that are beneficial to ourselves rather than fighting off these boogeymen and bugaboos that we're identifying today. So let me just summarize by saying that lynching is repugnant, bullying is lynching. Bullying is repugnant.
We want to thank Mr. Walter Searcy, who joined us. Long distinguished legal history in our city, and thank you for coming and joining us on the panel, Mr. Searcy. At this point, we'd like to invite the audience to ask any questions that they have. We'll have about 10 minutes, 15 minutes for questions. I'm wondering if panelists could identify maybe 2 mics on the table that work. I think all of them are supposed to work. I was told by TSU that there's a little bit of a delay, but if we can identify 2 working mics, Robert, would you grab one and handle that one? Robert, will you grab one of the mics? Yes, Robert.